Oh, we're here. We're here. My goodness. So the reason we were late is because when I was getting up off of taking a piss on the toilet, I like moved my neck funny and I got a strain, and so I've been hot packing my neck for a couple of hours while I get other commission work out of the way. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll do another hour or so cooking my neck. And actually, that worked. Although, if you hear any, that's the sound of my water bottle. I don't yet have one of those nice long wraps. I used to have one of them where it's like a long tube and you'd microwave it and it was full of like flax or something. Flax and lavender, and you'd put it around your neck. But I don't have one of those yet. I'm starting to think maybe I should get one of those. Oh, we're stretching it. Oh gosh. This is my own fault for not stretching properly before I work out. Oh, we're stretching. Oh my god. Okay, we're good. I know exactly what muscles they are too. It's like the ones that lay on either side of the spine. Close in there. Hey, Garnet. Alright. We're gonna switch to listening. What we were talking about, or we were listening to the Songhai Empire yesterday. I see no reason why we can't continue that. I can't remember anything that happened in the previous part of the empire. Wait, we had a super rich king who ruined the economies of several African cities as he moved to, or as he went on his pilgrimage to Mecca. That happened, and then he died. And then there was a problem with his succession. And I think we're still in the middle of the succession crisis here in the Songhai Empire. I think it's around year like 1500 or 1600. So we're going to get that going, and I'm going to start drawing.
The tyrant, the cursed, the oppressor, the Sani Ali, a model of shameful conduct.
Cosmic!
It's true that from virtually the moment he took power...
Oh god, are they putting
Ali
ads
went
at the
to
beginning of my
war.
stream now?
He was determined to modernize and reorganize his military. He had seen the Mali Empire collapse after its access to horses fell apart, and so he resolved to begin the large-scale breeding of horses in Africa. He built large stables to shelter these horses from the elements and from the disease-carrying tsetse fly. And he pioneered the use of crossbreeding to generate a breed of sturdy horses, well suited to the African environment. He also introduced the use of cavalry soldiers wearing iron breastplates beneath their tunics. These must have been difficult to wear in the African heat, but they would have greatly increased the weight and strength of his cavalry. One of his great passions was also the use of a river navy. He expanded the raiding boats that the Songhai had used in their rebellion until the Songhai commanded a large fleet of 400 boats that could transport troops up and down the Niger River at rapid speeds. He named one of his generals the admiral of this fleet, with the title Master of the Water. He loved these boats so much that during one siege of the city of Djenné, lying many kilometers away from the river, Sunni Ali had a long canal dug so that his boats could continue supplying his men on the siege lines. During this time, the Songhai abandoned guerrilla raids, instead taking on a more sustained and aggressive style of warfare. The chronicle Tarikh el-Sudan recalls the remarkable success that Sunni Ali enjoyed.
Ali was always victorious, pillaging every land on which he fixed his choice. Wherever he was present, his armies were never defeated. From Ganta to Sibi-Ridogo, his horses ran over all these lands.
Part of the success of his campaign seems to have been his extreme ruthlessness, which we get some sense of through the Timbuktu Chronicles. From the Mongols to the Assyrians, military leaders throughout history have used terror as a weapon. and it can be an effective military tactic. If your enemy are terrified of you, they may be more likely to run away and throw down their weapons, saving you time and resources in your conquests. Ali seems to have used this tactic to great effect. But I think some of the acts attributed to him go beyond this use of tactical brutality.
He was a little naughty.
One example is his treatment of a tribe known as the Fulbe, and he seems to have reserved a particular and unexplained hatred for these people. When they rebelled against their Songhai conquerors, Sunni Ali marched on them and had them executed en masse, so that if the chronicles are to be believed, their remaining population could fit beneath the shade of a single tree. His mood changed rapidly. He flew in and out of rages, sometimes condemning people to death, only later to change his mind.
Guys,
and
he's
let them go
literally
free.
neurodivergent and a minor.
Because of this unpredictable and at times brutal nature, Sunni Ali is described using an astonishing array of nicknames in the great chronicles
Seriously,
of Timbuktu.
I'll see them like the occasional farmer
Ali
who's
the
befriended a
merciless.
crow, and I'm like,
The
oh, that's
degenerate.
got to be useful
The
somehow.
accursed.
The great tyrant.
Arrogant one.
Ali the godless.
Yucky,
Profligate.
the yucky
Cold-hearted.
guy.
The despotic one.
Arrogant one. The shedder of blood.
The notorious evildoer.
The killer of so many people that only God the Most High knows the number.
That's his title.
The chronicles even attribute to him a number of actions that begin to sound almost cartoonishly
A
villainous.
major?
His heart was so hard that he once
Oh,
put
here's
a baby
coffee.
into a mortar and forced the mother to grind it, even while the baby was still
God
alive.
forbid women do anything.
The flesh was then fed to the horses. His acts of cruelty were so numerous that it would be impossible to record them all in a single volume.
It's at this point that I should introduce a note of caution about these characterizations.
They were all
It's
haters.
certainly possible that Ali was just as ruthless and bloodthirsty as they say. History, after all, is full of kings like this, and it's not hard to see why. Recent research has found that today, up to 20% of people found in the upper echelons of the corporate business world exhibit signs of psychopathy,
Based,
compared to only 1 in 100 in the general population.
based
and when violence
history
was
of
so often the key to power
fall
in
of
the Middle
civilizations.
Ages, there's no reason to believe that this number would be
Comrade?
any lower among medieval kings.
Hey, Raincoat Seth.
But to give Sunni Ali some credit, it's worth pointing out that these
Wah,
chronicles were written after his death, and on the order of kings who were trying to legitimize their own line of succession.
Hey,
Part of
Mike's on
the
the
way they
network.
tried to do this was to trash Sunni Ali's reputation.
I do try and keep it chill.
We should always bear in mind that these chronicles were very much political tools, an early form of propaganda for a new regime.
The woke
And at times,
agenda.
Sunni Ali does seem to have understood the value of mercy. Conquered tribes were ordered to join his army, swelling its numbers until the Songhai kingdom soon commanded a force of 40,000 infantry.
Is that
and
really mercy
10,000
when you
cavalry.
conscript the conquered people into your
But whatever
ranks?
else we
Maybe.
can say about him,
Maybe it's better than
it's
killing
clear
them.
that Sunni Ali was a complicated man. Some historians have even questioned whether he suffered from a personality disorder. But I think the least we can say is that the violence of this king appears to have stemmed from a number of deep-seated insecurities. Chief among these,
We are
seems to
roasting
have
this
been
guy.
hatred and distrust of scholars and their learning. It's not clear why exactly Ali felt this way. Perhaps, like some politicians today, he cultivated a kind of anti-elitist populism, which held knowledge and expertise in contempt. There were many
Damn.
rumors circulating about him too. Rumors that he was not really a Muslim, that he only paid lip service to the religion. And perhaps he saw these scholarly communities as the source of these rumors. Perhaps, quite simply, he couldn't read, and he hated those who could. Whatever the reason, the effects were the same, and they would come to bloody fruition when Ali set his sights on perhaps the greatest prize in all of Western Africa. the great capital of scholars, the heart of learning, the eternal library city of Timbuktu.
No. No!
Not the library.
Timbuktu is an ancient
Get his
city.
ass, I guess?
In the European imagination,
More Godot
it
practice,
has
yes.
become a metaphor for remoteness. When we say all the way to Timbuktu,
Got groceries, finished a
we mean
commission,
a place
yeah.
as far away as it is possible.
Big
to
day.
get. In fact, a survey conducted in 2006 found that over 30% of British people believed that Timbuktu was a mythical place.
I
like
literally,
Atlantis.
okay. We can roast the British people back then for thinking Timbuktu was fake. I literally thought Timbuktu was in Australia. I did not know it was in Africa until like 2 years ago. My ass is stupid, all right?
Atlantis or El Dorado. Timbuktu began as a seasonal settlement, about 15 kilometers north of the Niger River. It was a place where traders could come in from the desert and exchange salt, gold, ivory, and slaves. Legend has it that this camp was centered around a well owned by an old slave woman called Buktu, and so it became known as the place of Buktu, Timbuktu.
Okay, that's kind of awesome.
It became a permanent settlement around the year 1100.
He immediately lunges towards
And
the
under
garden
Mali
and starts
Empire,
shoveling
it
mulch
grew
into
to
his
house a
mouth.
population of well
That
over
guy's
100,000,
crazy.
which is double the population today. And made
You
it
went to the
one of
grocery store with a
largest
tummy
cities in
ache.
West
You are our
Africa.
strongest soldier, Astra.
At its height, it
That's-
was home to
that
Arab,
sucks. That's always the
Italian, and
worst.
Jewish merchants, and the city taxed around a tenth of all the goods that
Hate
passed
tummy
through
aches.
it. A vast wealth that led to an astonishing flourishing of culture, and above all,
I'd go so far as to say tummy aches are cringe.
Timbuktu has
That's
the
right.
perfect climate for producing and keeping books.
Ooh.
Books here were written on sheepskins, on tree bark, and on paper imported from Italy. And the dry desert air meant that their pages never warmed
Gizmo
or cracked.
and Ralph.
Books were written here
The
in
second
countless
strongest soldier.
African
Okay, this is
languages,
true.
like Songhai,
The real strongest
Fulani,
soldier is here.
but also in Arabic. Some were even illuminated with gold leaf. Timbuktu's people saw these books as symbols of wealth and power, and so an active trade in literature began with the rest of the Islamic world, until hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were collected here over the course of centuries. The city of Gao was the administrative center of West Africa, but Timbuktu was its intellectual center. If Gao was the heart of the Sahel, then Timbuktu was its brain. And this was the city against which the ruthless Sunni Ali, the great hater of books and learning,
Sorry.
marched
Saying
in the
hater
year
out loud is really funny.
1468.
What are we going to listen to when we run out of Fall of
Sunni
Civilizations?
Ali made no secret
I can
about his
start
intentions
back in on the
for
history of
city
Byzantium.
Timbuktu. He sent a messenger into the city ahead of his army to deliver a chilling warning to its remaining citizens. The medieval chronicle Tarikh al-Fatash recalls this event.
The messenger arrived at midday. The drum that he had brought with him was beaten, and the
Foldable
crowd
bags
gathered
on
around
wheels.
him.
A Dixie cart
Unsheathing
or
his
something?
sword and brandishing it by the hilt, he said,
Both
"This is the
wheels were
sword of the king.
gone!
I have been ordered
No.
to cut the throat of anyone who stays the night in this town." In the blink of
Enrichments.
an eye, all the town's inhabitants fled. Some did not even take their supper that night, while others forgot.
Guys,
the
they
blankets
didn't
of
even get to
sleeping.
have supper.
The sun had still not set.
Sorry,
before
this is a
200
tragedy. I
of
shouldn't
the
be making fun of these people.
evacuated. Most of the townsfolk
But please think
fled
of the
without
suppers.
bothering to close the doors of their houses.
Oh.
After the flight of its defenders, Ali succeeded in capturing Timbuktu without much resistance. And he was not merciful with the community of scholars who lived there.
He shoved every single one of them into the walker.
Ali immediately ordered his soldiers to gather together all the books he could find in the city and burned them in great bonfires.
Oh.
Luckily, many of the scholars and wealthy families who fled had taken their collections with them, saving some proportion of this ancient collection. Some also managed to hide their books in secret places. But Sunni Ali executed any scholars who remained behind. This is another
This guy's kind of a
time
buzzkill.
when Ali's cruelty just didn't seem to have a point to it. There was no tactical reason to victimize these scholars. It seems to have stemmed from something rooted deep in his personality, something that we as historians can only guess at. In fact, over the remaining 24 years of his reign, Ali would embark on no fewer than 5 purges of the city, attacking its noble families, destroying its books and schools, and expelling its scholars. All of this, as you can imagine, led to a great amount of resentment among the population.
Go ahead and make fun of them. What are they gonna do? They're dead.
People must have begun to
I
cry
like the
out
way you
for
think,
some
Miss Ebola.
alternative to this tyrannical
I'm gonna roast
king.
these people.
And if the chronicles are to be believed, that
Their
alternative
dinner.
was already gathering
Chicken
power.
thigh.
And his
Corn.
name was Askia
Hashtag my
Muhammad.
dinner.
This guy fucking hated learning. He would
By
hate
anyone's
this stream.
standards, Muhammad had no legitimate
Scurvy
claim to the
repellent
throne.
orbs. Little couple
He
oranges.
was a nobleman and a
More.
warrior who held a position in the Songhai Empire known as the Tondifari, the Lord of the
Tondifari.
Mountains.
Oh,
He was in control of the rocky hills and red sandstone mountains to the south. This landscape is broken by an incredible 500-meter tall cliff known as the Bandiagara Escarpment that runs for 150 kilometers along the modern border between Mali and Burkina Faso. This was a tough region, full of mountain bandits and hill tribes, and it was also one of the most highly militarized borders in the empire, facing the extensive lands of the powerful Mossi people in the south. Due to all of this, Askia Muhammad would have commanded a large and battle-hardened army. He was in the top level of Songhai military command. He knew how its army worked, its strengths, and also its weaknesses.
one of these streams, nothing but banana
Askia
and half a
Muhammad
cookie.
also
Yeah,
seemed
I did that
to
yesterday.
frequently
I had my
clash
protein
with
smoothie in the
Sunni
morning and then I
Ali.
forgot to eat until dinner. Our asses are
The
stupid
chronicles
sometimes.
never make clear the nature of these
Spicy meat
disagreements.
ragu.
But Muhammad
Oh,
was even imprisoned and
This-
sentenced to death on a number of occasions.
You know how
as
to talk dirty
Tariq
in this chat.
al-Sudan recalls.
More than once, Sunni Ali condemned him to death or imprisonment because of his stout heart and great courage. But because he was wise and prudent, the tyrant never did him any harm.
that's kind of funny.
It's possible they disagreed over questions of military tactics.
I'm putting you to death.
But
Ah, changed
everything
my
else
mind.
we know about Muhammad
I'm putting you to death. Ah, I
gives us
changed
a
my mind.
picture of a thoughtful man, a diplomat and a shrewd statesman. So it's possible that he may have also protested against the terror tactics that Sunni Ali employed and had the king's rage.
Yeah, sorry, I got
rained
windows
down
open
on him
again
as a
and it's
consequence.
still construction.
Either way, it's clear that Askia Muhammad was
This
a
silly
deadly
little
menace
bird.
for King
Quack.
Sunni Ali. The Askia was rebellious,
Tagliatelle with
But he also
tomato
seemed
sauce,
to have
lard,
been
and peas. Why
indispensable.
not?
and he was steadily positioning himself
Got a full pantry
as
but can't
true
cook shit.
alternative to the tyrant king.
Kinda based.
Soon enough,
Cinnamon
he would
toast
get his
crunch.
chance.
Ugh. God tier cereal.
Sunni Ali died in November 1492.
Oh,
How exactly this happened is
Rip
a
Bozo.
mystery. In the Timbuktu chronicle Tariq al-Fatash, his death is a divine intervention. He gets struck down by God as a punishment for abusing a holy man. And this explanation should immediately give us some cause for suspicion. In the
I don't
other
know, seems
chronicle,
reasonable.
the Tariq al-Sudan, we get a slightly more realistic scenario. In this version, Ali drowns when a flash flood of the Niger River washes into his camp near the village of Kuna. Of course, flash floods were a deadly fact of life on the medieval Niger.
not for
just
me.
as they are
Not for me
today.
and almost lifeguard.
But this would have still been
Literally not
incredibly
even a
bad
factor.
luck
Lifeguards
for
can't
a
even
king.
physically drown. It's impossible.
And it's worth mentioning that if historians are correct, the village of Kuna was found. within
What
the
the scallop? A
mountainous
second
territory of
Marika stream
Songhai.
this week?
the same
It's actually the
region
third, and I'll
that
do a
at the
fourth
time was
tomorrow.
controlled
You can't
by
stop
the
me.
Lord of the Mountain, Askia Muhammad. Perhaps after
Carrots.
himself
But your
being
cart is getting
sentenced to
heavy.
death
No.
by Sunni Ali multiple
Mac and
times,
cheese.
Askia Muhammad
Smoked salmon.
finally did what his opponent didn't have the courage to do.
Yeah, French toast.
That
Get it.
is, give the order to end his life.
They're building a house. Hell
In
yeah.
my view, another piece
Amish
of
grind
evidence
set.
for this is a single line in the Tarikh al-Fatash. It's mentioned quite incidentally that Ali's soldiers buried him before anyone else had even learned of his death. If this is true,
Let's make this
maybe
fucking
that
guy
he
worm
had
food.
wounds on his body that they wanted to conceal. Ali was succeeded by his son Baru. It's not
Please let
known
Baru
whether
not be a
he tried
prick.
to continue the repressive policies of his father. Either way, half the country, sick of Sunni Ali's rule, burst out in open revolt. Some noble families who had fled Timbuktu during Sunni Ali's time on the throne marched back home with their armies, and the man they rallied around was the one who had headed the opposition against the tyrant, Askia Muhammad. The speed this all happened at makes many historians believe that this was a plot that had been in place for a long time, perhaps for years. And perhaps suspecting the nature of this plot, Sunni Ali's son Baru was determined to stamp out this upstart General Muhammad. Sunni Baru's armies massed around him, as is dramatically rendered in the Tarikh al-Fatash.
His troops surrounded him like a mountain range.
RDR2 building song.
The raised
muffled
storms
in the
of
background.
dust that turned day into night, and they were mirrored by the great cries.
Allowed to use
All swore
pneumatic
that
power.
blood would run
In
torrents.
what form?
Askia
Like
Muhammad
just slightly more
also
complicated
gathered his
pumps?
rebel forces
That's just like just a touch of
and marched
technology,
on the
like
capital city
18th
of
century
Yao.
technology.
Sunni Baru marched out
Pistons,
and met
yeah,
him
alright.
on the battlefield at a place called Anfal. His army outnumbered Askia Muhammad's, but Baru must have been nervous as the army of this experienced general gathered outside of his city. He must have tried to remember the lessons his father had taught him. First, the two armies would have exchanged a volley of arrows, their cavalries harassing and harrying each other's lines, as well as skirmishing among themselves, before the spearmen finally drew in together to fight. When the two armies met, the experience of Askia
If you
Muhammad
guys were
won over the
medieval
greater numbers of
fighters,
Sunni Baru.
what part of the
One of
army would you
Baru's
be?
generals, when he saw which way the battle was going, threw
Would you
himself
be
into the river Niger and drowned.
knight like infantry? And
From
if
this
so,
moment
would you
on,
be
the
swordsman
Askia
or maybe a
Muhammad would
lancer?
rule the
Or would you be
24
the
tribes of
archers? Or would
Songhai.
you be mounted cavalry? Dead.
The death
Yeah.
of the tyrannical king Sunni Ali in
I would be
November
a spearman.
1492 came at a
I'd
historical
coordinate
tipping
with
point
my
of
pals,
immense importance.
and I would
Around the
spear
world
the
at this
shit out of
time,
people
Big things were underway.
with my
The
big
Catholic
spear.
monarchs of Spain had enacted a new law
Cannon fodder.
punishing
If I got to
all
choose,
Spain's
long range
Jews.
archer.
As many
Oh wait, my
as
vision sucks.
200,000 Spanish Jews were
Starving as a
lost.
farmhand with diseases so
The
fucking
Sultan of
many.
the Ottoman Empire sent his grand fleet to escort them safely to
Yeah, we'd be dead from
reconquer
smallpox by
lands.
the age of 3. We wouldn't even have proper
1
names.
month before, England's Henry VII had laid siege to the French port of Boulogne.
Every time I listen to a history podcast, I'm like, okay, imagine you're doing all this
And on
fucking
the other
stupid
side of
medieval
the
shit, but you
world,
also have
in
like
the
a
islands of
UTI,
the Caribbean,
and it's the same
only
UTI you've
days
probably
before
had for
Sunni
years, and
Ali
it just
was
keeps
swept
coming
away
back
in
or
that flash flood.
sticking in your
A
bladder.
European explorer,
God, I'm so glad we
Christopher
live in the
Columbus,
modern age.
first set foot on the New World. The Battle of Anfar in 1493, when Askia
Sectoplasm,
Muhammad
hey!
emerged victorious outside the walls of
Thank you for
Yao,
the subscription.
came just a few months before Columbus
Huh.
set out on his second voyage. And for the history of the African continent,
Thank you,
this
Miss Ebola.
discovery would
But please
begin
put me
one of
ass
its
out.
bleakest
I want my ass to be the apex of the pile on the catapult. Thank God UTIs don't exist. True.
It's not recorded whether news of these developments reached the new king of Songhai,
Empty OJ.
Askia Muhammad, but he
Welcome.
had quite enough to be occupying his
Gumbo.
home. Muhammad had
Very
inherited
true.
a Songhai territory
Very
that had
true,
never
Astra.
been larger.
Always be pissing is actually
By the time he
my
came to the throne, Imperial Songhai comprised a broad diversity of ethnic groups, including the
rule.
Fulbe, Soninke, Tuareg, Dogon, Bambara, and Bozo.
Bo-
But
sorry,
it
I thought he
also
said Boza.
suffered greatly
Or
from
Bozo. He said
decades of civil
Bozer.
war and attacks by its aggressive neighbors.
Imagine if he said
Muhammad
Bozo.
immediately set about trying to fix these problems. In response to ongoing attacks from outside,
Fuck!
he
Astra,
became
that was a
determined
train wreck.
to reform the Songhai army and secure the empire's borders. He
I did not.
expanded
Did you put it on Twitter?
cavalry and moved away from the use of slave soldiers and conscripts to become a true professional standing army.
Let me look at my mentions here.
Soon after seizing
Maybe
power,
it's in
he
DMs. Oh,
embarked
no,
on
wait.
several campaigns that were
Magnificent.
even the
Oh,
ferocious
hell yeah.
Sayyid Ali. He announced a legally sanctioned jihad against the Mossi people to the south.
Hell yeah, hell yeah, hell
He
yeah.
marched on their cities, capturing many of them and expanding the empire further. Then he marched against the desert Tuareg people.
Me for
and seized the
real.
salt mines of
Gianni
Tafazet,
for
a
real.
land where the salt was so numerous that
And
people
you even
built
have the
their
right
houses
tablet stand,
out
look at
of
that.
Salt bricks. Askia Muhammad spread the boundaries of the Songhai Empire. until it was the
Obliterated my
largest
Twitter notice for
territory
like a week.
that
Yeah,
Africa
die.
had ever seen. But while he shared
Yes,
something of
yes.
his predecessor's military skill, in many
It's
ways,
such a good tweet. That was you, Astra?
seems to have
I do
been
seem to
the
remember
polar
it was you.
opposite
Yes. I was like,
of
oh, I
Sayyid
know.
Ali.
I know who did that one. Or I
Whereas
remember that
Ali
tweet.
had only been a conqueror,
Extremely funny.
Muhammad was a diplomat
Die.
and an administrator. He sought to reconcile the differences of the people in his empire. And the chronicle Tarikh al-Sudan speaks especially highly of him.
Through Askia Muhammad, God the Most High alleviated the Muslims' distress and eased their tribulation.
Alright, hell
He
yeah.
strove to establish the community of Islam and improve people's lot. He befriended the scholars and sought counsel from them over the appointments and dismissals he made.
Alright, hell yeah.
It should be remembered that these chronicles are essentially pieces of propaganda for Muhammad's Askia dynasty. But we do see this character in evidence in our other sources too. Muhammad's friendship with scholars is perhaps the thing that so distinctly sets him apart from his predecessor.
Let's see. The
He
other
made
one
peace
murdered
with
all
the
scholars
persecuted
left in a
scribes
town.
and learned men of Timbuktu,
And this guy
bringing
didn't do that.
banished families
So he's
back from
popular.
exile, and even
That makes
maintaining
sense.
personal friendships with some scribes. Askia Muhammad was also pluralistic and outward-looking. While the chronicles don't mention Sunni Ali doing a single thing outside of the empire's borders, Askia Muhammad brought in a new age of diplomacy.
Askia
He
Muhammad
forged
seems like a pretty real guy.
connections that reached right across the Muslim world.
I'm into it.
And he even made a pilgrimage to Mecca in imitation of that legendary king of Mali, Mansa Musa. And perhaps most crucially, in a symbolic act, he invited
Mecca's
the
in
leader
Jordan,
of
right?
each of his
Where is
empire's
Mecca?
ethnic groups to join him on his pilgrimage.
And how long
Even
has the
ethnic
cube
groups like
been
the
there?
Fulbe, which had been persecuted and
Oh,
massacred
it's in
under
Saudi
Sunni
Arabia.
Ali,
Oh.
were invited along. And this, more than anything, was the true source of Askia Muhammad's success. In the new Songhai Empire, he began to forge a state that crossed ethnic boundaries. The empires that had come before were only ever
The
just
penis
that,
eek? No?
empires.
The oinous
In the
music
Ghana
of...
Empire, the Soninke people had conquered their neighbors and ruled over them. In the Mali
Close
Empire,
enough.
it was the
I'll tell you how
Manding
it's spelled.
people who did the same. But in Songhai, a new
It's a
kind
silly
of
Dutch name. You
people
never have to spell it right.
formed.
In fact, I encourage you to spell it wrong.
It was a nation that incorporated all the different peoples that lived within its
Zach,
borders,
you do whatever
which
you have
inspired
to get
loyalty
through
to
the
peoples
day.
that rose above their
If that means
original
autopiloting,
tribes.
do it.
It was a very modern kind of state. And Muhammad also succeeded in doing what few Songhai kings had achieved before. That is, to unite
I
the
wanna
two
eat the cube.
sides of the empire. its heart in Gao and its brain in Timbuktu.
Gianni had a violent love
Muhammad
affair
managed
with
to bring the Muslims of Timbuktu over to his side.
oh my god, what was it
but
called?
he never truly renounced the ancient magic of his ancestors.
It was
Fused together,
oh my god, what was it called? It was an Ultima like
during Muhammad's
Islands of the Caliph.
established standardized
Gianni had a really great time with Islands of the Caliph, which is like a Muslim-centric adventure game.
an organized tax system.
But at the very end, like the whole thing is basically you're on a religious journey and you're converting to Islam. And at the end of it, the win state is you go to Mecca and you do like the ritual. I think it involves like walking around this cube for like 7 times and then going inside or something. And then the game just ends. But he had a really great time playing that, which is kind of shocking to me, but like an Ultima-like. Gianni like tweaking on an Ultima-like. I'm also pretty sure that it used assets directly from Diablo, like the buckler from Diablo with like the 4 metal studs in the middle. It was just that icon, but slightly color graded different. And I'm like, wait. But no one tell Blizzard because fuck them.
But Askia Muhammad seems to have been reluctant to give the crown to any one of his sons. As his sight increasingly failed, he reached the age of 70. He began to heavily rely
All
on
right,
his
let's get this
powerful
back on
royal
here.
vizier to enact policies for him. Rumors began to spread that this vizier had undue influence over the old king.
That's why it sounded familiar.
But
It
Askia
was
Muhammad
Transformers.
also had 37 sons. And as
America
he
from
got
Elden Ring.
older,
It's
each
super
of them
close. It's
began
close
to
enough
take
that when I was
on
playing Elden Ring and every
to
time they
pass
said
on the
America, I was like, oh.
one of them. Eventually, one of these sons, a man
Leader
named
of the
Musa,
Deceptive Bitches.
grew tired of waiting. Musa is remembered in the chronicles as an impudent and stupid boy, spoiled by a life of royal luxury.
They roasted him.
He moved to seize his father's
Chat,
crown,
they fucking
defeating
roasted him.
Askia Muhammad and banishing the blind old man to an island in the middle of the Niger River, which the chronicles describe as a place infested with mosquitoes and toads. Musa's seizure of the throne naturally enraged Askia Muhammad's other sons, many of whom probably thought they had a better claim. The empire soon erupted in civil war. Musa would go on to kill several of his brothers and nearly 30 of his cousins, some in battle and others in assassinations and executions. But eventually he himself was overcome in the year 1531, just 2 years after taking power. The Songhai Empire, like Ghana and Mali before it, had few clear laws of succession. And while the Askia Muhammad made many legal reforms during his reign, this seems to have been something that no one had mustered the political will to change. A period of bitter usurpings and civil wars followed, but there was one ray of light to come out of all the chaos. About 8 years after the toppling and banishment of Askia Muhammad, one of his other sons, a man named Askia Ishmael, managed to seize the throne. He ordered for his blind father to be released from the mosquito-infested island where he had been imprisoned, and so the old
I like that
king
he dropped the
returned to his
toads
home
part
to
of that
die
island
1
thing.
year later.
I was like, yeah, toads all right.
But what
Mosquitoes
the spoiled
less.
Prince Musa had unleashed couldn't be contained. Askia Ishmael soon died in unknown circumstances, and the chaos of disputed succession rolled on. The next 20 years saw almost constant bloodshed, as various claimants to the throne of the Askias fought and died. Whole generations of young men were piled into this meat grinder, all to satisfy the vanity of princes. Askia Muhammad had turned the Songhai Empire into one of the world's great powers, and as so often happens when a great society is built, men would now risk everything to take it for themselves. The chronicle Tarikh el-Fatash doesn't mince words when it comes to the question of what led to Songhai's growing weakness.
What caused the ruin of the state of Songhai and compelled God to throw it into disorder? What brought divine punishment down upon its citizens? It was their failure to observe the laws of God, the injustice
Obviously.
of slavery. The most
Meat
grave
grinder?
crimes and
Like the
most
level from
extreme
Alterkill?
acts were committed there,
It's Germa's
as
meat
well as the
grinder.
pride and arrogance of the great ones.
I was hoping you were choking.
We
I
all
cast
belong
spell of
to God.
die.
It is to him that we should return.
Grind some meat.
As civil wars raged, the country's wealth began to run dry. Wars caused disruption at the lucrative
Alright,
trade
you lucky
hubs
bastards,
of
get some
Dene,
tea pouring
Timbuktu,
ASMR.
and Gao, damaging
need
the
more
land's
tea.
income. West African armies also lived and died by their supply of horses, and each rival warring prince
It's out of my
needed a steady
Henry
supply
the
to
Fifth,
replenish
whichever
his
one had
army.
all those wives. But out of
These
my Henry the
horses
Fifth
were usually
teapot.
imported across the desert from Europe at great expense. But with all the disruption and chaos, increasingly only one resource remained in abundance in West Africa that could be traded for the horses needed in these wars. And that resource was its people. During these times of crisis, the slave trade increased in volume. Defeated armies in these civil wars were frequently captured and sold, and thousands were shipped across the desert to be sold as laborers in Europe and Arabia. This was a crucial moment for the history of this continent. The failure of political stability in its largest empire, coupled with an increase in slave-taking to pay for these constant wars, coincided in tragic form with the first European trading posts that were set up by the Portuguese at São Tomé and São Salvador, as well as fortified positions all up the coast of Morocco. This was the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade that would dwarf the Saharan slave trade, both in its size and its cruelty. Within 20 years of Askia Mohammed's death, barely 50 years after the discovery of the Americas, as many as 250,000 Africans had already been kidnapped and transported to the New World. By the time the slave trade was abolished in the 19th century, the number would exceed 12 million.
Abolished,
And of
huge
these,
air
nearly
quotes.
2 million died on the voyage.
2 million dead. Just in the voyage. Holy shit.
The period of bloodletting did come to an end in the Empire of Songhai, with the reign of a man named
I'm sorry to ruin the solemnity of this moment, but Germa's meat grinder
He
being across the street from
seemed
Mickey's
to
Dick
have
Smasher
reached true
is really good.
and immediately placed his sons in strategic positions
Anyway,
in
sorry.
government. And his ability to stabilize the nation would lead to a brief return to its former flourishing state. For this reason, he is often referred to as Songhai's second greatest king, after the great Askia Muhammad. But when Askia Dawood came to power,
It is pretty
he
funny.
inherited a weakened,
The meat grinder part, God.
damaged country. It's clear that during the 20 years of unrest and civil strife following the death of Askia Muhammad, rebel factions across the country had gained power and confidence. Askia Dawood undertook a number of campaigns to stamp down insurgencies across the country, and he sent his cavalry up into the mountains to put a stop to bandit raids there with some success. But if he had any hopes of expanding his borders further like his predecessors, that would have been put a stop to by a failed campaign against the Mossi people that killed a large number of his commanders. Dawood even embarked on several public works, instituting the equivalent of public libraries in the kingdom. But all of this came at a cost. During his long 34-year reign, slavery greatly increased in the empire. Songhai's agriculture suffered from wars, as well as droughts and famines, and in response, it seems that the former citizen farming was replaced with slave plantations. While slavery had always been a feature of Songhai society, during Askir Dawood's reign, the empire became a true slave state. This would have caused social disruption across the land, as whole communities were harrowed by slave raids.
Yeah, just imagine
And this
not feeling
would have
safe in your own
in turn
country
fueled
that like
political
someone could
disruption.
come over the hill and just
There are even
like put you in
stories of
chains.
royal slaves attaining great power and
Psychologically,
wealth
like
in
what does
Songhai,
that do to a
even
country?
going on to command significant influence in the capital after the deaths of their masters. But towards the end of Askir Dawood's life, things...
Guys, this horrible tragedy is pretty funny. Wait! Don't snap that! Don't snap that!
In the year 1582, a great plague killed many in Timbuktu, and syphilis, brought back from the New World by Europeans, appears
Oh
to
my
have
god,
also
is
ravaged
syphilis
the
European? Of
population.
fucking course it is.
And with the
Yuckers.
final death of Askir Dawood 1 year later, in 1583, Songhai once
Syphilis?
again spiraled into civil war and chaos.
I hope those ad breaks are worth it for Twitch.
The kings that followed each ruled for only a few years before being killed or deposed. At the same time, drought descended on the region, followed by famine and inflation.
Sonic
A
inflation.
strong Songhai state, at the height of its power, might have been able to ride out these challenges. But with rival princes fighting over the throne, there was no energy available to help Songhai's people, and its now largely slave-based agriculture began to collapse. Songhai entered the final stages of the imperial society.
Everyone
And
called the
after this
Dark
point,
Ages, yeah.
There was no turning back. The final king of Songhai was a man
Sissy Fuss.
named Askir Ishaq II.
One must imagine syphilis
Little
happier.
is known about this character.
Sonic
What we
inflation?
do know isn't
It's a
good.
classic video game.
He seemed
It's a
to be
classic
a
Newgrounds
relatively
Flash video
competent
game that
ruler,
Gianni
but he
played
was also vengeful
a couple of
and
years back.
merciless.
Real
seems to
fans
have
of Sonic
channeled the
inflation.
energy of
It's
Sunni
exactly
Ali
what you think it is,
far
but
more than Askir
shockingly it's
Muhammad.
PG rated.
The chronicles remember Askir Ishaq
Good stream.
burying some of his enemies alive,
Assist, pussy,
wrapped
push that
in
button.
palm frond sacks. And he had one lord beaten to death with a knotted belt.
Oh,
And this was also the king who would preside over the final dramatic collapse of the entire Songhai Empire. This unrest in Songhai came at an unfortunate time. That's because it coincided with the growing power of a rising star in the region, the Kingdom of Morocco. Situated on the North African coast, right across the Mediterranean Sea from Spain and Portugal, Morocco had been growing in strength and confidence for many years. A new dynasty, known as the Saadi, had seized control of the country in 1549, and they gained huge popular support by expelling the Portuguese from the forts and trading posts they'd established
oh
along the Moroccan
so
coast.
based. Bye,
In
bitches.
retaliation, Portugal invaded Morocco,
Wait,
and it was so confident in victory that it sent its king and virtually the entire Portuguese nobility on the campaign.
oh no, bros,
They met
no.
the Moroccan Sultan's army at the Battle of Khazar el-Kabir. The Portuguese, believing themselves inherently superior to the Arab Moroccans, were overconfident in battle. They allowed themselves
Once
to be
again,
surrounded,
race science,
enveloped,
stay
and
losing.
utterly defeated. 8,000 Portuguese soldiers
Look, a
were
cowboy.
killed and 15,000 captured.
The gender
The
envy
body of
incident
the
for
Portuguese
Sonic?
King Sebastian was never recovered, and virtually his
I
entire
vaguely
court
remember this.
was
Oh,
eradicated
another
in one
cowboy.
blow. Portugal was
When was
virtually
that stream
beheaded
asking for
in
a friend?
single
Yeah.
day, and this resulted in a succession crisis of their own that led to them becoming part of a union with Spain for the next 60 years. The Moroccans were understandably ecstatic. They had decisively defeated their greatest rival,
I would like to go to
but the
Morocco.
victory had all but emptied their
It is a
treasury.
very pretty looking place.
And with their confidence at
My
an
secret
all-time
white girl
high,
fantasy is
the
going to
Moroccans
Morocco.
began to turn their gaze southwards
Eat a bunch of
to the
fish.
rich but troubled lands that lay across the Great Sahara Desert, the lands of salt and gold, the lands of the Songhai. One of the prizes that the Moroccans most coveted was the salt mines of Tajaza, that rich salt pan where people literally built their houses out of salt.
Huh. Oh, that'd be so cool.
But they also believed the European rumors that a great gold mine must lie somewhere in Africa, and they desired this mine for themselves. It's clear that by this time, news of the internal divisions in Songhai had reached beyond its borders. One chronicle even names an escaped royal slave who is supposed to have fled to Marrakesh and delivered a message to the Moroccan king,
informing him of the weakness of Songhai's leadership and providing intelligence about them concerning their desperate circumstances, their depraved natures, and their enfeebled power. He urged the king to take the land.
And so Morocco seized its chance. They prepared an invasion force. This invasion was actually led by a Spaniard.
Gianni's big arms give me gender envy, and he snitched to him.
Giudardo
Listen,
piercing blue eyes.
like, again, I am cis.
He was
Gianni's
born
arms
as
give me
Diego de
gender
Guevara,
envy because I want to be a
but was
huge muscle
captured by
mommy,
Moroccan
and he is a
slave
huge
raiders
muscle
as
mommy.
a boy, and brought up
Every
in the
day.
service of
No,
the
here's my rant. Every day I gotta wake up in the loving arms of that huge set of biceps, and I have to go, God, I gotta get more beefy. Horrible, horrible existence I live. It's really hard.
From there, he rose through the ranks of Moroccan society and proved himself a shrewd
He gives
military
great hugs.
commander.
He's a very good hugger.
But he
The
had
two
no
genders,
small
huge muscle
task
mommy and
ahead
huge
of
muscle
him.
mommy. Agreed.
To invade Songhai, he and his men would have to cross the Great Sahara Desert with all their equipment, and the impoverished Moroccan Sultan had given him scarcely any resources at all. In fact, the force they mustered to undertake the invasion of Africa's greatest empire was tiny.
Tiny.
Giudardo
Oh.
had barely more than 4,000 men, including just 500 light cavalry. And they knew that if reports were correct, an army of tens of thousands guarded the borders of Songhai.
Wobble
But they
if they
had
jiggle.
a secret
When he's
weapon,
relaxed, they'll jiggle,
that
but
would
when he
tip
tenses
the
them up, they are
scales
like stone.
dramatically
They are
in their
literally
favor.
1-to-1 rock.
Something that in all their years of civil war, the kings of Songhai had neglected. And that thing was gunpowder. Since its development in China,
You can't
in
just
the
ask
9th
someone if it
century,
jiggles.
gunpowder had
We
become
can make you
increasingly
bigger
important
with sonic
feature
inflation
in
technology.
European battlefields. The first cannons began as siege weapons, used to knock down castle walls.
Cannons.
But as the technology became more refined, they soon became used as a battlefield weapon too. Handheld guns began as defensive weapons in Germany in the early 1400s. They were mounted on city walls and used to fire pellets of lead or
Jesus.
stone down onto attacking forces. But by 1450, they had become handheld weapons. Around 1475, the matchlock mechanism was added to firearms. It was the first mechanical firing device, meaning that guns no longer needed to be fired by lighting a fuse with a match. These were the first guns with triggers, and they transformed the way battles were fought.
Oh, great.
Around 1520, towards the end of Askia Mohammed's reign, the first muskets were developed, named after the French word mousquet, or sparrowhawk. This
Really?
was a firearm capable of piercing heavy armor, and it ended the age of the armored soldier on European battlefields.
See, another huge L for guns. I like
Although
firing them,
the
they're fun,
Spaniard
but come
Giudardo
on. We could
marched
have had
with
more
only
suits of armor.
4,000 men. Of these, the majority were musketeers. Many of them were mercenaries from Spain, and he also brought with him a total
Own a
of
musket
8
for home of
English
defense.
cannons.
Very based. Yeah, my brother has a flintlock. It's not the
Giudardo's
same as a musket,
expedition
but
left Marrakesh in November 1590.
for when he
taking
wants to
advantage
blast a,
of the
what was
slightly
it, like a
cooler
grapefruit-sized
winter
hole in a home invader?
But still, it was slow
It's kinda
and
fun.
arduous going.
So smoky.
The troops lugged their heavy equipment, their 8 cannons, and all their armor and supplies. As was common for desert crossings, many must have died along the way. It took them nearly 4 months, twice the normal journey time. But in February, they finally arrived on the banks of the Niger River, dusty and beleaguered, and only enough of them to fill a large theatre.
So they went to
From
the theater.
there, they marched on the Songhai capital of Gao. It took them another month to cross the silty floodplain of the Niger. The ground would have been swampy and infested with mosquitoes. Many would have contracted malaria or the dreaded sleeping sickness. But soon the city walls of Gao came into view in the distance, that red sand dune on the horizon turning pink at sunrise. And in the cattle pastures outside the city, at a place called Tondibi, they also saw the vast army of the Songhai Empire marching out in all its
Suits of armor
glory
are
to
so
meet
gender.
them.
Very true. Got me that blunderbuss.
The sight must have been
Just imagine a
incredible.
revolver musket. I'm sure
Estimates
those
vary,
exist.
But the force gathered by the Songhai king
Efficiently
Askeri
was
Shah
prioritized.
likely
Oh,
topped over
kicks the can.
40,000 men.
Stupid.
And some sources put it at as many as 80,000, enough to fill a large modern sports stadium. If you've ever been to a stadium during a big game, you can probably imagine the sound that this army would have
I like
made.
how much of that is an if. Like,
ground
this guy's a
would have
historian, so
shaken
he's like,
with
okay, if
force
you've
of
been
their
outside your house
footfalls
ever,
and the hooves of their tens of thousands of horses.
I
They
know
would
you
have been
guys are fucking
accompanied
nerds.
by a substantial troupe of drummers and other musicians, thousands of archers, and tens of thousands of spears clattering overhead as they marched. In contrast, the Moroccan army must have
Damn
looked
desire for
tiny,
progress.
thin and scattered. But they lined up along the low rise of a hill and readied their muskets to fire. Despite their enormous strength in numbers, the Songhai military...
Oh no, we need to tell a child their
didn't
parents are
get
dead.
off
Womp
to a great
womp.
start.
Thank God for that little bit in
They had heard
parentheses.
rumours about the wonder weapons that the Moroccans had brought with them, and they had come up with a plan to neutralize them. But the age of the great tacticians Sunni Ali and Askia Mohammed were gone.
No, it
The
lives on in
beginning
me.
of the
Hit him
Songhai
with a really
plan
big rock.
was to send a stampede of 1,000 cattle towards the Moroccan lines. They hoped this would soak up some of the Moroccan musket fire, and that it might even panic the foreigners into retreating.
But this was such a shitty idea. I
Then
can't believe
the
they tried to
enormous
do this.
force
So
of Songhai
shitty.
heavy cavalry could mow them down as they fled. But this tactic didn't quite go as planned. The cattle stampede began, but as they bore down on the enemy lines, the Moroccan soldiers let off a volley of cannon fire, as recalled in the chronicle Tarikh el-Fatash.
When the cattle heard the sound of the rifles, they became frantic. They stampeded back towards the soldiers of the Askia, crashing a great number between them, the majority of whom died.
Despite this setback, the Songhai infantry advanced. But they didn't fare
Wires.
much better
Infested
than
with
the
gummy
cattle.
worms. Yeah, they are wires.
From the high ground in the distance, Moroccan muskets let off puffs of smoke.
It sucked. Oh, that kid
Before
starts
the distant
crying.
cracks of the weapons could even be heard, the pellets of lead would have
Take her by the
struck,
shoulder. Your parents are
whizzing
dead!
through the air, passing right through armor and flesh, mowing hundreds down in a
Major
single
Madness,
volley.
hello.
I
It
am
would
doing
have
well,
been
thank you.
Truly terrifying, as the chronicle recalls.
Just wrapping up, I
The
think,
dust
on
and
this
smoke
first
engulfed the
commission.
throng of combatants,
It's going well.
and God sowed fear and dread into the ranks of the Songhai army.
It's at this point that the Songhai king
Do a little bit of
Ishaq
post-processing
seems to
here.
have begun to panic. He ordered his cavalry to charge in against the line of musketeers, desperate for some of his soldiers to even reach them. But the cavalry charge would be hopelessly doomed. Their thick breastplates would have been effortlessly punctured by the whizzing musket balls, and their horses, unused to this new, strange threat, panicked and fled the battle. The Songhai archers were mowed down before they could come into range, and soon these too fled the battle. Only the Songhai rearguard remained. These were the elite royal bodyguards of the king. Perhaps beginning to feel a little sorry for their enemies, or beginning to suspect that this massacre was not the most honorable thing, the Moroccans finally advanced, drawing swords and polearms for close combat. The elite royal bodyguards of the king, enveloped on all sides, stayed and fought to the last man.
Damn, dude.
One Spanish source even records that they bent their knees to the ground and tied them into position with their belts, so that they could maintain their spear line even as the strength of their muscles failed.
Damn, dude.
But it too was a doomed effort. The Songhai force was utterly crushed.
See how
King
fun
fled, along with the rest
guns
of his
make
soldiers,
warfare
and
not be?
Shujar Pasha's
It
men
sucks all the fun out of it.
descended on the helpless city of Gao. They
You know,
sacked
warfare,
it,
historically a
looted
very
its
fun action.
treasures and burned its buildings, before moving on to the richer trading centers of Timbuktu and Jenne, where they looted and burned in a similar fashion.
Thick breasts.
The chronicles
Where?
recall the devastation caused with deep sorrow.
Sorry, I was possessed.
It is beyond our powers to fully describe all the misery.
John A. Violence and Michael Gunn invented the first firearm. That's so fucked up. Make tall siege towers like a real warlord. You get it.
And cut down the town's trees.
Horrified by the defeat, the Songhai generals deposed their useless king, Askia Ishaq, and the central power of the state collapsed. Morocco attempted to occupy the Songhai lands and build an empire of their own in West Africa. But the challenges of maintaining such an empire across the obstacle of the Sahara proved too much. Still, they looted everything they could from Songhai, carrying everything they could transport back across the desert. When they faced resistance in Timbuktu, the Moroccans even sent leading scholars to Marrakesh in chains and kept them there as hostages. The wealth of Timbuktu, Gao, and Jenne was systematically stripped. When the Spaniard Shujar Pasha returned to Morocco in 1599, victorious 9 years after setting out across the desert with his army, his caravan included 30 camel loads of gold as payment for his services. The fall of Imperial Songhai happened completely and all at once. Its complete dissolution came only 8 years after the death of what is remembered as its second greatest king, Askia Dawood. It burst like a bubble from a single puncture. The defeat at the Battle of Tondibi sent splinters running right across the empire, just as had happened to Ghana and Mali. Soon, where a single state had existed,
This drawing
now
is the
countless
Mexican flag, but
small
more hard.
kingdoms reasserted
Mexican
their
flag
freedom
goes pretty
and
hard, though. I don't know if I
separate
can. I don't know if that's accurate because holy shit.
Western
Does the
Africa
Mexican flag
cracked
ever go
like
hard?
an egg. Kingdoms splintered into smaller kingdoms, which themselves splintered into even smaller kingdoms. Now, there could be no unified
Ooh, we just want a flag that has like a little bit
resistance
of
to
red
the
on it.
spreading
Ooh, we want a maple
influence
leaf.
of
No, we get a
European
fucking eagle.
colonialism. As the splintering states warred amongst themselves, they would frequently sell their captured enemies into slavery, boosting the slave economy to untold heights. Predatory Europeans set up trading posts all along the African coast, profiting from the chaos, and the full horror of the transatlantic slave trade began. As the
Neotech
manpower of
Mexico,
Africa
accurate.
was drained on
Put
an
Goku on the
industrial
flag,
scale,
okay.
its hopes of ever
One
rebuilding
criticism of the Mexican
glory
flag or
of
any
Ghana,
flag is Goku
Mali,
is not
and
on it.
Songhai
Very true.
would be frustrated. In the years that followed, the economy of Timbuktu declined, and with it,
Gonna
its
give another
position
5
as a
minutes for
center
this
of
one because we
learning.
started a little late, as always.
The destruction of the city was so profound that the author of one of the chronicles, a man named Al-Sa'adi, wrote this lament at the beginning of his work.
I have witnessed the ruin of learning and its utter collapse.
His sorrow at the destruction that he witnessed during his life is what inspired him to write his masterpiece. He writes that he hopes his chronicle will inspire future generations to remember these days of greatness.
Because learning is rich in beauty and fertile in its teaching, since it instructs men about their fatherland, their ancestors, their history.
Well,
the names
okay,
of
says
their
a
heroes
scholar.
And what lives they lived. I asked God's help and decided to set down all that I myself could learn on the subject of the Songhai princes, their adventures, their story, their achievements and their wars.
As wars between splinter states raged on across the region, Timbuktu was repeatedly besieged and captured. Many of the city's great scholars were kidnapped and sold as slaves during this time. They were shipped to the coast and transported across the Atlantic to the New World. As the city declined, its libraries gathered dust. Over the centuries, its manuscripts became precious heirlooms, and the city's noble families hid away their cherished books in private collections, often protecting them at great personal risk against raiders and invading armies. The dry desert air and these dedicated caretakers preserved their pages perfectly, and it's thanks to the efforts of these families of book lovers that the two great Timbuktu chronicles,
Family of
which
book
made up so much of
nerds.
this episode's story, have survived.
Mexican
The great
cartel member
capital
hesitating
city
to kill me
of
as I
Gao
tell him this isn't what
slowly
Goku would
faded
want.
and shrunk into obscurity. As its population left, sycamore trees and silk cottons put down roots into the cracks in its walls. Its great mosque began to crumble beneath the forces of the weather, and its eastern
Alright,
tower
I'm gonna call this one done, and then just take a quick
Soon,
little bathroom
only
break.
about
But I'm gonna leave you guys
300
with the history
families
of
would live
the
here,
Songhai episode,
surrounded
or
by the ruins
Empire,
of
for
the
a
city's
hot second.
former glory, now overgrown with thorns and bushes. No more would be heard of Gao on the world stage until the German explorer Heinrich Barth stumbled upon its ruins in the 19th century. But the imperial cycle went on and on. The fractured states of West Africa would eventually be folded into the sea-going empires of European nations, the French, British, and Portuguese, who extracted their resources and grew rich on them. That is, until the cycle turned on, when these subjugated client states demanded their independence, and the European empires fell apart in the 1950s and 60s. If there's one thing you should have learned over the course of this podcast, it's that history is change, and nothing lasts forever. I want to end this episode with a couple of short passages from one of the documents that has informed so much of the history of this region, the Timbuktu Chronicle, the Tarikh el-Fatash, the Chronicle of the Seeker. This document is a remarkable piece of literature. It represents the unifying of the two great traditions of the Songhai. It's a perfect marriage of the scholarly Islamic traditions of Timbuktu with the ancient beliefs of the griots and sorcerers of West Africa. And the result is a work of startling poetic value. It's a book of history, but it's also an epic piece of poetry, including dream visions, prophecies, and conversations with spirits, that make it, in my view, one of the great pieces of world literature. One incredible passage recounts the great king
All right, we're
Hassan
back.
Muhammad speaking to a wise man. This man teaches the king to
You
speak
chatter,
to
hey-ya.
the spirits,
Normal?
and they tell
Payphone.
him about his nation's
Haven't been in
past,
a while.
but also crucially,
Go piss, girl. You mean they.
they give him a remarkably accurate account.
Timbuk was so great, why didn't they make Timbuk 2 or even Timbuk 3?
Unless you're inclined to believe in prophecies, of course, it's likely that this was written after these events, and therefore forms a kind of lament about the direction that the empire went, an elegy to a lost golden age. As you
We're on
listen,
dudes now.
I'd like you to think
We're on
about
Dudes
how it
Rockin'.
must have felt to watch this complex and sophisticated society slide into chaos. As the doors of the great library
Yeah, Azrael.
too closed,
Y'all already
and
know
the
it.
books began to gather dust on their shelves. Imagine
I can't
what
show
it
you
must have
most of
felt
the
like
references
to watch the
I was
trees
given, but
begin to grow
this one
in
you
the
can see.
walls of the great mosques of Gao.
Ugh,
and
Photoshop
Jin,
did its thing where it doesn't
their
let me
mud
zoom in.
walls
Okay, one
crumbling,
second.
their towers collapsing.
There we go. Okay, we're good.
Imagine watching the population leave one by one, and the houses empty. The booming markets go steadily quiet, and the sounds of prayer in the mosque go silent.
No.
As the rolling sand dunes begin to burst through the doors, rolling over hills and houses, while all the while the songs of the griots still sounded somewhere in the gathering dusk.
The prince asked the wise man, "Tell me, is it possible for men to see the spirits and speak with them?" "Yes, it is entirely possible," the wise man replied. "If we were alone, we could speak with them right now." The prince ordered all those who were present to go away and leave them alone.
Get the
but
fuck
only
outta
the
here.
prince and the wise man remained. They stayed in seclusion for a long time, and then the king spoke. "I see the earth's surface transformed into a lake of water," he said. "I see the stars surging out of the water and flying towards the heavens. The birds swoop down around me, and they cut each other to pieces. Next, I see 7 men carrying a green throne, which they place between the 2 of us. So we sit for a while, only to see a great number of men appear before us, some holding books and others holding writing tablets. In their midst, I see an old man who leans upon a staff. I don't know where any of these people come from. They sit down and stare at us. The old man approaches the throne and takes his seat. The old man spoke a prophecy. "As a ruler," he said, "you will be quite happy, tolerant, and
The
generous.
ragu is good.
You
Yeah!
will go
W!
blind. You will have many sons.
Please put it in an
but when
envelope
you are
and send
gone,
it to me.
They will no longer walk the straight path. They will bring devastation to your kingdom." These words saddened the prince, who remained silent for a long moment. Then he let out a profound sigh, like the moaning of a father who has just lost his son.
Ah.
Thank
Oh my
you
God.
once again. for
Photoshop
listening
is
to the
not
Fall
letting
of
me zoom today.
Civilizations podcast. I'd like to thank my
Please.
voice actors for this episode: Ree Brignall, Jake Barrett Mills, Brian.
2 to 6
Scioli,
business days, you may
and
have to
Pip
reheat
Willett.
it.
I'd love to hear your thoughts and responses on Twitter.
All right. That's the Songhai Empire. What lessons did we learn? I feel like there's a lot of lessons in there. Which one have I not listened to, or at least listened to in a while? I might be all caught up in this. Did Byzantium? Did the Bronze Age collapse? Did the Greenland Vikings? The Khmer Empire. Have we done that one? Have I listened to the last one yet? No, I recently listened to this one. I mean, we can listen to the history of Byzantium. I think I'm mostly up to date with Byzantium right now, but I can't remember anything that has happened. So maybe it's a good time for me to re-listen to it. Let's just look at the index here. He does have a series, called Stories of Byzantium, which is kind of a little bit more of a... it's less reciting events and more like what it's like day to day for certain people. They've got like a whole series on women. You know what? Maybe we'll listen to one of these. Who the fuck is Demetrios? Roman healthcare. Oh, do I feel like listening about Roman healthcare? I'm a bit of a... Hypochondriac. Okay, wait. Wait. We're gonna choose one. We're gonna choose one. You guys are gonna be real pissed when I choose it. I should have chosen this out beforehand. I apologize, folks. Do one on the Ottoman Empire. I mean, we probably could. We just have to wait a couple more episodes and then Byzantium will turn into the Ottoman Empire. Designing a mashup of Greek and Roman gods. Hey. Plus a little bit of Greek, a little dash of Greek. Well, good news. Byzantium is a good mix of those two. Oh my god, please just navigate me to a normal part of Byzantium. Okay, we're doing the one about women. First, I have to find the first part of that. Oh, this one's good name. Byzantine Stories, Episode 7, Women in the Roman World, Part 1, The Lesser Sex. Lesser sex. I prefer to have greater sex, thank you very much. Wait for it. We're getting this going. This is one of the episodes that's behind a Patreon paywall. I will... maybe I won't do this one in the future just because it's probably kind of shitty for me to do this for this guy. But I'm also like, small enough audience that I feel like if I'm advertising the history of Byzantium, that's better than a bunch of people listening to it for free, like 18 people listening to this episode for free. This is just the first episode of one series, so it's just a taste. But, if this gets struck down somehow, then you'll know why. But, as always, I encourage everybody to listen to this show. It's very, very, very good. Very interesting. And you can listen to it for free. Just some of the episodes are not. Now I just have to find the actual episode in this thing. Oh my god, dear lord. Okay, we got it. Hank! Oh, I gotta remember to change!
Byzantine Stories.
Alright!
Episode 9. Women in the Byzantine World.
Let me know if that's a little too loud or anything.
Part 1. Immense.
It's not our fault. The dude's already profiting off of history. True. Let's get this guy.
This is the story of Saint Mary, or Saint Marinos.
You can get tons of free podcasts. Like, I listen to almost
named
all of this stuff
Eugenius,
free.
who
And
lived
then just
in
every once in a
purity,
while I'll be like, I
piety,
feel like supporting
and
him.
in the fear of God. He was married and had a daughter named Mary.
Sorry, who the fuck are we
His
talking
wife
about? I
died
talked
while
over it.
Mary
Go
was
back, go
young.
back, go back.
Marinos. Part 1. Immense and immeasurable. This is the story of Saint Mary, or Saint Marinos. There was a man named Eugenius who lived in purity, piety, and in the fear of God. He was married and had a daughter named Mary. His wife died while Mary was young.
I love
so
that
he
people
raised
live in
her
fear
alone,
of God. That's so
teaching her
funny.
the ways of a pious life. Once she'd grown up, he decided to enter a monastery. Mary cried and begged him not to leave her behind.
Too bad, bitch. I'm
Eugenius
scared of God.
responded, "Child, what am I to do with you? You are female.
No, fuck off.
A monastery. How then can you remain with me? For it's through the members of your sex that the devil wages war on the servants of God."
Okay.
Mary was persuasive, though. She convinced her
Sorry,
father
if that
to
scared you.
take her with him. So
This
they
guy
cut
sounds like a
all
real
her
Jordan B.
hair off,
Peterson kind of guy.
dressed her like a man, and renamed her Marinos.
Holy shit, boys.
After giving away all their possessions, they each took their vows.
We got
and
T-boy
entered the
swag.
monastery. Marinos remained undetected, as her new brothers assumed that she was a eunuch. With her high voice and beardless face, what other conclusion could they draw?
My bad.
Marinos excelled at the
Kills
monastic
you.
life. She was selfless, modest, and hard-working. After her father died, she gained more attention, being gifted by God with the ability
Oh, sorry,
to drive
dog.
demons from the sick. The other 14
Oh, you're
monks
autistic?
she
Oh, you're
lived
easily
with
stimulated?
were
Let me
impressed
blast this
and looked
directly
upon
into
her
your
as one of their
brainstem.
brightest and best. Every month, 4 of the monks would leave the monastery and travel out to the wilderness. Their task was
People
to
should
take
rightfully
food
fear
and
us. Very
supplies
true,
to their
bestie.
brothers who'd chosen to live a solitary life. The journey was long, so the monks would stop at the same inn on the way out and the way back. Marinos avoided this duty for some time for fear that it might expose her gender, but eventually she was forced to go. While staying at the inn, a soldier who was also spending the night slept with the innkeeper's daughter. When she became pregnant, the soldier told her to blame Marinos, a young and good-looking monk who'd been present around that time.
I love this story already.
When he found out, the innkeeper raced to the monastery, loudly abusing the monks he met at the gate. The superior came out to hear the charges and put them to Marinos. Rather than bring
So
any more shame
awkward.
to her home, Marinos accepted the charge and begged for forgiveness. The superior had no choice but to expel Marinos from the monastery.
Oh my god, she had to
Slaved
take the fall?
outside the gates and remained there.
She had to
day
take the
after
fall and she
day,
didn't even get to have
relying
sex
on
with
the
that
charity
farm girl?
which the monks handed out to the poor. When the innkeeper's grandson was born, the man handed the baby over to Marinos, saying, "Here is the child which you have wickedly engendered. Take it." And so Marinos raised the child alone
Oh my
outside the
god.
monastery gate for 3 years. At this point, the other brothers begged their superior to change his mind. They liked Marinos and found his plight pitiful. And so the superior relented, allowing Marinos and the baby back inside, but only as the lowest of all the brothers. At this, Marinos wept and gladly spent her days doing the most menial chores, while also raising the boy that was not hers.
Oh my god.
The boy grew into a man and served the monastery well. And as more time passed, there came a day when Marinos was absent from all her usual duties. At the end of the day, the superior sent men to look for Marinos, and they found their brother dead in her room.
No!
All was sad. But as they prepared the body for burial, a great cry went up. "Lord, have mercy!"
He's got a boy pussy!
They discovered that Marinos was, in fact, a woman. The superior came to see for himself, and when he set eyes on her body, he collapsed to the floor in tears and cried out, "Forgive me! I
Aw.
have sinned against you. I shall lie dead here at your feet until such a time as I hear forgiveness for all the wrongs that I have done you."
That is so sad.
And while he was uttering many such lamentations, a voice spoke to him, saying, "Had you acted knowingly, this sin would not be forgiven. but since you acted unknowingly, your sin is forgiven. The superior got up
thanks, God.
and summoned the innkeeper, who was equally incredulous. His daughter had since been possessed by an evil spirit. She was called for and confessed her lies at Mary's grave. As she did so, the demon left her. Let us then, beloved, zealously emulate the Blessed Mary and her patient endurance, so that on the day of judgment we may find mercy from our Lord Jesus Christ, to whom belongs glory and dominion to the ages of ages. Amen.
No, you accidentally skipped a sex scene. No! Who are you gonna sex? No excuses. Go back. Load the save right now. You know, every time you skip a sex scene, you spit in the face of an animator.
Hello, everyone. As you may know, I've already produced 3 episodes about women in the Roman world, which are available for you on the ad-free bonus feed at patreon.com/history of Byzantium. I now present 3 more episodes about women in the Byzantine world. And these episodes are very much a continuation of that series. You don't have to go back and binge them to enjoy these, but you may get more out of them if you do.
I'm not doing that. That's way too much
Let me
work.
just recap those episodes for you briefly. In part 1, we talked about the structural obstacles which women faced in the Greco-Roman world.
Okay, so I fucked up,
They were
and I
barred
don't
from
know which
serving in
episode
the
we're on,
army,
but
government,
whatever.
or major priesthoods, which meant they had little opportunity to change their status. Unless they were born to a wealthy family or married into one, they were unlikely to exercise much agency. In part 2, we looked at the daily lives of women. Despite the restrictions they faced, many women found a way to make a mark. They worked in various industries, they ran businesses, they inherited fortunes and kept them. And then in part 3, we looked at individual women who broke through the silence of male historians and became powerful figures in their own right. Clodia and Fulvia came to
Like what
prominence
you
as
have.
the Republic broke down. Their position as leading lights in powerful families allowed them to boss men around for a change, while Hypatia
Girl boss.
rejected family life, remaining unattached and able to focus on her career. I noted at the time that it was Hypatia, a pagan philosopher, who
Pagans.
created the blueprint for the holy women.
I
of
went back, I
Byzantium.
win.
Ugh.
So here we are, in
Enjoy.
Christian Byzantium. And it is Christianity that marks the shift from the Roman to the Byzantine worlds, as far as this series is concerned. So the question is, what did Christianity do for the lives of women? At first glance, there were a number of positive developments. Jesus was a radical figure. He baptized women and men side by side.
Hey, what?
He preached tolerance and forgiveness. In the eyes of ancient men, the worst crime a woman could commit was adultery. But when the Pharisees dragged a woman in front of Jesus who'd been caught in the act, he simply responded, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone."
Those Mormons never stood a
Early
chance.
Christian sects saw
Get 'em,
women
empty OJ.
playing a prominent role and taught that old distinctions between Jew and Gentile and perhaps even man and woman might be swept away.
Gender radical Jesus?
But the truly radical strains of Christian thinking eventually hit the windshield of Greco-Roman culture. As Christianity went mainstream, it had to adapt to the norms of the Mediterranean.
Very funny.
Still, it seemed like this new religion would take some of the hard edges off Roman civilization. Christian moralists preached forgiveness and charity, and spoke out against the brutal parts of public life. The gladiatorial games disappeared, and the death penalty became rarer. Christian marriage, in theory, elevated the status of women. Jesus taught that marriage should be monogamous and for life. This was quite a change for both the Jews and the Romans. Jewish men dominated their marriages and could have multiple wives. And though Roman marriages were monogamous, they could be easily broken, particularly amongst the upper classes. The Christian insistence on charity would eventually create major changes in the attitude of the state towards social care. Emperors would come to see philanthropy as part of their job. Orphanages, old age homes, and hospitals would all be funded by the state to alleviate the worst burdens of medieval life. At the height
Was
of their
J-Man
wealth,
a boobs or
both
an ass guy?
Alexandria
I
and
refuse to answer.
Constantinople
You cannot
developed
refuse to answer.
maternity wards to try and bring some expertise.
Jesus was
to the
part man,
process of childbirth.
and therefore, he would have had a
Christian
preference.
charity also gave women a respectable reason to be seen and heard. They were celebrated for giving their time and labor to noble causes.
How
And
nice.
rich women could fund or found churches and other institutions, allowing them the chance to create their own legacies. The early Christian movement benefited greatly from the generosity of women.
J-Man was
who
100% a feet guy.
donated their late
We've confirmed
husbands'
it.
estates to their new faith.
Personality guy.
As I said, though, there were some things Christianity
Thighs or
could
hands?
change.
Hands!
Men remained the dominant sex, and women continued to be barred from the roles in life that would allow them true agency. Women could not be priests, soldiers, or administrators.
Okay, well, the last one
Menstruation
I'm okay
was
with.
still considered impure, and women were denied communion until 40 days after giving birth.
Yeah.
And
After
despite
giving
the vision
birth?
of Christian
What's wrong with
marriage
giving
as something
birth?
entered into with full consent, Roman families continued to marry off their daughters at a young age. In fact, Roman customs proved hard for the church to change. Despite the new ideal of lifelong, indissoluble marriages, the sources remain littered with the traditional picture of human relationships. Young people fell in love and had affairs. Married couples cheated on one another. Men slept with prostitutes and slaves. People wrote love poetry. And we know this from innumerable legal cases and law changes. People continue to get divorced and remarried, especially after the death of a spouse, despite the church's disapproval. Many of the rights that women had won in the late Republican period remained in place throughout Byzantine history.
You have sexed
Women
Gale.
could inherit
Excellent.
and bequeath property. Daughters were entitled to the same amount of the family estate as sons. And when a woman married, her dowry was offered stern protection by law. Though her husband could use these assets, it was illegal for him to sell them off. He was obliged to maintain the dowry at the same value as it had arrived.
Man, it really shows how, like, wild
Much of this
Christianity must
legislation
have
was
been.
designed to protect children as well,
Like, what a change
to make sure
it
they
made.
inherited something in the case of acrimonious divorce or sudden death. A man marrying a widow was meant to adopt and provide for her offspring from a previous union. And though women were not meant to testify in court against men, we have plenty of evidence that they did. As ever, though, a woman's ability to actually enforce these rights depended entirely on her circumstances. If she had money, an education, or a powerful family, her chances increased greatly. This was a theme we discussed at length in our earlier episodes.
Well, sure
Women
wish
were
I
at the
picked the right
mercy of
episode.
fate, in a way men were not. The statistics around childbirth are shocking. The odds were stacked against children making it to their 5th birthday, while the danger for mothers was very real and got worse with each subsequent baby they had. Still, for those who survived this game of Russian roulette, their prospects could improve dramatically. Women were almost always younger than their husbands, often much younger. This meant that when their husbands died, they would take control of the family wealth and finally be given the chance to make their own decisions.
How nice.
One study of 14th century
You just have to
Macedonia
survive having a
found that
baby.
20% of households were being run by widows. In practice, this means that Byzantine women played an immense role in Roman history. They took charge of the estates which fed the empire and organized
Just don't
the
want kids,
careers of
yeah.
their sons and the marriages.
Neither do
of
I.
their
We,
daughters.
not having kids. We're having dogs.
Further
And
down
we'll
the
adopt a
social
couple, like,
scale,
adult
little
people.
changed from Rome to Byzantium. The vast majority of people labored from dawn till dusk on their farms, while women in the cities continued to work as bakers, cooks, and cleaners, as well as playing
Baker.
major roles in the garment and food industries.
Making the munchies.
Female doctors, midwives, and wet nurses were also needed to deal with female problems, at least in the places who could afford such luxuries. Finally, women could work as entertainers or prostitutes. Despite the pleas of Christian moralists, neither profession ever went out of business. In terms
You
of dress,
cannot be contained.
Christian culture encouraged
Dogs
a
are
trend
good.
that already existed in the pagan world, which was for women
That's
to be
okay.
largely
Wanting a kid is
covered
cool.
up in public. Ideally, only their
Just gotta
hands
make
would
sure
be
you're
visible,
ready.
as the rest of them would be wrapped up in long tunics,
Free child.
veil, headdress, and cloak. Leonora Neville, who we spoke to about Anna Komnene, writes very well on this subject. She says that the way a virtuous woman...
I think if I
is
already didn't
expected
have
to
like
behave in
nieces
public
and nephews,
was
I'd be a
with
little bit more like, oh, the
ostentatious
biological
restraint.
drive. But I do have nieces
Not
and
only
nephews, so I'm
covered
like,
up from
I'm
head to
good.
toe, but looking downwards,
But
never meeting the gaze
kids are
of
cool.
strangers,
Having kids is cool.
avoiding any gestures or movements
Hard
that
fucking
might
work,
have
though.
the potential to arouse men. In
Wait, what was that
elite
about arousing
circles,
men?
the almost
Are they wearing
impossible
slutty
ideal
anklets? Hold up.
was to keep... Spoke to about Anna Komnene, writes very well on this subject. She says that the way a virtuous woman was expected to behave in public was with ostentatious restraint. Not only covered up from head to toe, but looking downwards, never meeting the gaze of strangers, avoiding any gestures or movements that might have the potential to arouse men.
They
In
cannot
elite
keep their
circles,
boners
the
in their
almost
pants.
impossible ideal was to keep your daughter out of sight of other people until her wedding day. These hints of the fears and anxieties around female sexuality brings us to one of the big downsides of Christianity.
Ooh, we're about to roast Christianity.
Condemnation of sexual behavior
Oh, here it is.
as sinful.
Arousing men, now you're speaking my language. I have a niece turned nephew. I've got a trans nephew. I've got a half niece and I think a half nephew, very young. And I want to say there's an extra one flopping around, but I can't remember what gender they are.
There was once a pious monk named Zosimus.
But he
left
liked
his
to
monastery
fuck.
near the River Jordan every Lent to spend time alone in the desert. One year, he was
a lot
determined
of
to
nephews.
travel to its very center, either to grow closer to God through this ascetic feat, or to encounter some desert father who could become his mentor.
Father.
After 20 days of travel, Zosimus was performing his prayers when he saw a distant figure doing the same. He stared hard,
What if
trying
it's a
to
sexy
work out
lady?
if this was just a mirage, or worse, a demonic phantom. But as he got closer, he could see it was a person. A naked person, whose skin was dark from a lifetime of exposure to the sun.
Naked.
Zosimus was excited and ran forward. Here was a master of ascetic discipline to learn from. But the figure ran away on seeing the monk. Zosimus chased and called out, asking for the figure to stop and speak with him. Eventually he became too tired to chase and broke into tears. The figure stopped too and
Me.
turned, and then called out,
Don't be such a
Father
bitch.
Zosimus, forgive me in the name of the Lord. I cannot turn toward you and be seen by you face to face, for as you see, I am a woman, and I'm naked, and I'm ashamed to have my body uncovered. But if you are really willing to grant one favor to a sinful woman, throw me the garment that you're wearing, so that with it I may cover my feminine weakness and turn towards you and receive your blessing. Zosimus was shocked on two counts: that this master of ascetic discipline was a woman, and that she knew his name. He gave her his cloak and averted his eyes, but once she was covered, the two engaged in an amusing contest of modesty, each begging the other for forgiveness and asking for a blessing.
It's cute.
She pointed out that he was a priest, and therefore more worthy than her, while he was sure that she had been on a righteous path far longer than he had.
No.
Plus,
You're more
how did you
blessed.
know my name?
No.
She resumed her prayers momentarily, and as she did so, she began to levitate.
Oh.
Zosimus was dumbstruck. He then begged her to tell him the story of her life and how she'd attained such gifts from God. Full of shame, the woman told her story. She was born in Egypt and lived a disreputable life. Full of lust, she had experimented sexually from a young age. She had wasted her youth partying and slipping into a life of semi-prostitution. As she told the story, it was not just the corruption of herself she was ashamed of, but all the men she had led astray.
Oh, those poor men.
One day, she
That's
saw
so
some
sad.
sailors rushing to their boats. She was told that they were sailing for Jerusalem. It was soon to be the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross. This piqued her curiosity.
That's my favorite feast.
And she approached the men to buy passage.
Man, I
on
want to
the
go to a
ship.
feast.
Having no money, she paid in a way that was agreeable to all, and now a source of much shame. Once in Jerusalem, she followed the crowd.
Get that
to the
priest.
feast. Everyone rushed inside a church to see the life-giving cross. But this woman could not enter. An invisible force field
She's too
guarded the
naughty.
door. She pushed against it, but it was unyielding. She tried sneaking in with a crowd, or running, or kicking, but nothing she did could get her through the doorway. Exhausted and frustrated, she sat down in the courtyard and contemplated her life. It dawned on her that it was the filth of her actions that was barring her entrance. She began to cry and lament. Looking up amidst the tears, she caught sight of an icon of the All-Holy Mother of God staring back at her. She begged the Virgin to forgive her and allow her to enter the church, and suddenly she felt a change inside. She was able to enter the church.
So we're just going to ignore the fact that she just started levitating?
Later she returned to the icon of the Virgin and begged for direction. She heard a voice telling her to cross the River Jordan. Once there, she would find a place of repose. When she arrived at the Jordan, she bathed in its waters, and then took communion for the first time sincerely. She then crossed the river, and for the next 47 years, she wandered the desert.
Damn, bitch.
She was forced to tackle her lust and other temptations head-on.
She was so
conquering them
horny.
only with help from God. As she told the story, she quoted lines of scripture. Zosimus was amazed and asked when she'd last read them, but she replied that she never had.
Whoa, she just knows them.
Yet, the word of God, which is living and powerful, teaches man knowledge. She asked only two things of Zosimus: to tell no one about her, and to bring her the sacraments the following year during Lent, which he did. After tasting bread and wine for only the second time as a true Christian, she asked Zosimus to return the following year to do the same. But when he did, he couldn't find her.
That bitch is dead.
He searched everywhere, and eventually he discovered her dead at the very spot where they'd first met. Beside her, written on the ground, it said,
Go
"Father
snort some
Zosimus,
ibuprofen.
bury the body of the humble Mary in this place. Return dust to dust, and pray always to the Lord for me. I died in the month of April, on that very night of the Passion of our Saviour, after I received the Holy Last Supper."
You get my little
When the
suppy.
monk read these words, he was overjoyed, for he had learned the name of the Blessed
It's so thick.
He realized that as soon as she had received the divine sacrament at the River Jordan,
Her ass
she
died.
came immediately to this place, where she died. Zosimus buried her, returned to the monastery, and told her story to the monks there, who gave thanks to God and honored her memory.
Interestingly enough, this is actually a non-secular podcast, but the framing for this makes it sound like an actual, like we are listening to a Bible story.
This is a new segment of the channel called Bible Stories.
She actually didn't die. She went back to the city and started having a lot of fucko again.
The two stories you've
Scott's
heard
face is
so
kinda
far
fucked. Hold on.
are hagiography, the lives of saints. These stories give us a rare glimpse of Byzantine popular culture and an even rarer chance to hear stories about the lives of women. Now, the two tales I've told you are clearly fictional. We will get closer to
What do you
real
mean?
people in our next
Fictional?
episode. But they give us a sense of how women were thought of and celebrated in Christian Byzantium. As Christianity grew and rubbed up against the pagan world, Christians had to prove themselves. They had to demonstrate to others that their faith was real and that their God had power. The heroes of this movement were those willing to suffer, either to die as martyrs or to perform great ascetic feats of endurance. Stories of their achievements were written up in the monasteries and convents which began to dot the Eastern Empire. The positive side for women was that female saints were given prominence, their exploits celebrated, and their ability to match their male counterparts demonstrated. But you probably noticed
Guys,
a
if this
strong element
shitty
of
woman was able to do
condemnation
something,
in both
wow.
stories.
Truly is a feat.
Saint Mary, or Marinos, dresses up as a man so she can live in a monastery. But initially her father responds to this idea by saying, "It is through the members of your sex that the devil wages war on the servants of God." Similarly, Mary of Egypt must repent in the most hostile conditions imaginable in order to overcome her sin of enjoying sex. That women's sexuality was a wellspring of sin eventually became standard thinking in ecclesiastical circles.
Yeah, like women are the horny, kind of like
The
predatory.
men who led the monastic movement
That was
were
common.
students of Plato, Aristotle, and all the great
Kinda based.
Greco-Roman thinkers. From them they absorbed the idea that the body and soul were separate things, that the
I
mind
knew
could
that
be
bitch didn't
refined and
float.
improved despite the hindrance of bodily needs and desires. Jesus could not be matched, but he could be imitated. By removing all temptation from life, one could overcome most sin and be more pleasing to God. No sin was more contaminating, it seemed, than sex itself. Theologians like St. Augustine theorized that in the Garden of Eden procreation was entirely rational and calm. But once Eve tasted the forbidden fruit,
She was like,
she
"Oh."
seduced Adam into abandoning reason. For
Yeah, that's right.
passion.
Eve introduced doggy
Thus,
style,
women were condemned for their
BDSM.
sexual nature,
Holy shit.
which drew men away from the righteous path. Many ancient male thinkers had dismissed women as the lesser sex in their writing, and now the men who read their works reproduced the same stereotypes in their sermons and treatises. Tertullian called women the gate of the devil.
Oh,
Clement of Alexandria said, "It is a shameful thing for every woman merely to think that she is a woman."
what?
Origen said, "Woman represents the flesh and the passions, while man represents reason and intellect."
Men are agents
John Chrysostom said,
are
"The mind of woman
That's
is
my
somewhat
Jordan B.
infantile."
Peterson impression. That's why cramps
As I
exist,
mentioned
yo.
earlier,
So
daily
true.
life probably didn't change that much. Men and women continued to find love, happiness, and heartbreak just as they always had.
Men and women continued
But
to
the mood
touch
music
grass
of the
despite
ancient world,
the clergy being
which
like,
had somewhat
no.
celebrated beauty and sensuality, was now changed. Sexuality was now viewed with deep ambivalence.
He's calling us emotional.
From shame to sin, as historian Kyle Harper puts it. Even in those saints' lives, stories meant to praise female chastity and
I
modesty.
hope I don't mess this face
there
up.
is a
I'm kind of
hint
zoned
of
out.
titillation. Were
I
these
need a
stories
reference.
popular because of the message of forgiveness and repentance? Or were some audience members delighted at the thought of a woman moving around a male monastery, or hearing about all the men that Mary led astray?
Oh.
Christian Byzantium developed its own Madonna whore complex. The two sides of womanhood could be summed up in the images of Eve and Mary, one a weak temptress, the other a virginal saint.
Me when I'm a weak temptress.
You may think of Mary as being simply a virgin before she was married, but in Byzantium a tradition developed that Mary was perpetually virginal. In fact, the most popular stories extended this back even to her own birth, giving her an immaculate conception to prefigure that of her own son. These archetypes confined the space for female expression. Any move away from the shrouded figure staring at the floor while standing next to a male relative could now be viewed as sinful as well as shameful. Of course, this strict, pious view of the world was not one everyone held. The Byzantines were self-aware. One of the few women we know about from the so-called Dark Ages was a poet and hymnographer called Cassia.
I'm
In
doing this
celebrated
entirely
legend,
wrong. Hold up.
she was one of the girls chosen as a potential bride for the Emperor Theophilus. At
I'm
the
still in
bride
paint
show,
mode here.
Theophilus was brought in to greet the various girls waiting nervously in a reception hall. Seeing Cassia first, beautiful and bright, he said, "Ah, what a flood of terrible things came through woman," referencing Eve. And Cassia, quick as a flash, responded, "But also through woman, better things spring," i.e. Jesus. Theophilus, stung by the speed of her riposte, moved on to someone more pliable.
Whatever.
I think the real shame for us is that I can't tell you much more about the lives of the millions of ordinary Roman women who made Byzantium what it was. In the earlier period, we had so much more to work with. We had the houses of Pompeii and triumphal arches put up by proud matriarchs. We had gravestones depicting or even writing out life stories. We could read plays full of female characters. Even the letter collections of men might be addressed to women or talk about the women in their lives. Much of this trove of evidence is absent from Byzantium. We have no Pompeii and very few gravestones. As the empire became poorer, the means to carve them diminished, and with it, the fashion for doing so. We have no plays, which ceased to be popular even before Christianity took over the culture. Letter collections are few and far between, and of course archaeology has been hit by blows from multiple directions. Some early digs ignored the Byzantine period in search of more interesting finds from the classical period. And while Western Europeans generally incorporate the Roman past as part of their nation's history, the picture is different in Turkey. It's harder to generate interest and investment in sites with only a Byzantine past.
Ooh.
It's such a shame because
Wee
it
woo,
excludes
wee woo.
so many women whose contribution to Roman civilization was immeasurable. Until more evidence comes to light, we will have to look elsewhere for Byzantine stories covering the lives of women. In part 2, we will take a trip to the convent, the institution which allowed women to live lives largely free of male interference. We will also hear more stories of the female saints who made a mark on the world. And then in part 3,
Sexy
we will
nuns,
close our
sexy
series by
nuns.
talking about the ultimate exception to the rule, the Empress.
What a good episode. I am fucking this face up. We're hitting this guy with a stick, I'm telling you. Too busy thinking about all those nuns. Let me get the next episode. Ugh, oh my god, it's under the $6 membership. Okay, hold up. We're upgrading our membership today. By the way, we got an extra 15 minutes on this one. He looks so angry. Why does he look so angry? Oh my god. Face be gone. bonked him. Oh my god, it's Germa. Germification? We summoned him by talking about the meat grinder. I should pull out a picture of Germa and use him as reference. I just looked up, like, Greek men, and now I see a bunch of friggin' very, very grainy, hot, possibly AI-generated Greek dudes. Please. Please let me listen to the next episode. Take it. Please. Women Part 2. That's what I'm putting in their search bar. The Convent. There we go. We got it. Yeah. That's what I get for trying to do a painterly
Byzantine
style.
Stories.
Oh.
Episode 9. Women in the Byzantine World.
Turning you down a bit, bud.
Part 2. The
Perfect.
Convent.
You gotta get that classical thing. Sometimes Gianni will just like have his hand in a pose, and he's of course Italian, and it's like, dude, like that's a Michelangelo hand. Like, stay still. I want to take a photo of that.
She pretended to be a man. Stories centered on that theme were very popular. in
Alright, he's
early
got dark
Christianity,
scleros, doesn't
and
he?
they came from a real place. The early church believed that Jesus' second coming would be soon, possibly within their lifetime. Some gave away their possessions and abandoned the traditions of this world so as to be ready for judgment and salvation. Sexual renunciation was a big part of this, and as monasticism developed, women wanted to be included. Some even donned the dark robes and tried to pass as men. This urge prompted the church authorities to develop the concept of the convent, a female monastery.
So
where women
complaining
could
does
live
work.
as their brothers were already doing.
Yes.
It's worth saying that the Order of Deaconesses did provide women with an official role within the church hierarchy, but for those who wanted to leave the
Okay, I
normal,
actually think I would be a
sinful
convent
world
chick.
behind, only the monastic life would do.
Hang out with all the other lesbians? I mean, with all the other women?
By giving official
Don't have to talk,
sanction
just do a bunch of work all day?
the
I'm
church
okay with that.
hierarchy could also step in and manage them, regulating their activities and appointments and making sure no
I bet
unorthodox
Gianni is a
practices
spaghetti cutter.
developed.
No, he's not actually.
Male
He like
monasteries
gasps
dotted the
anytime
landscape.
ordinary sausage cuts up spaghetti.
Sometimes
Great YouTube
perched
channel, by
high
the way.
up on mountains or isolated by a desert stream. Convents, far fewer in number, were almost always located near cities. The greater vulnerability of women dictated that they not be left alone in desolate spots.
Just give him a gun, it's
A very
fine.
real concern once Arab raids became a regular occurrence. Sometimes convents would even be paired with a male monastery, carefully segregated, of
Oh,
course.
of course.
This offered the nuns some protection, as well as the chance to pool their labour with that of their spiritual brothers.
Comrades.
This conception of the convent provided women with security and a new family to replace the one.
Ain't a big
they
deal in
left
your house,
behind.
hat.
The desire to keep women within the recognizable structure of society could be seen to
I'll kill
extend
you where you
to the
stand.
nature of their calling itself.
Add permitted
Though they
term,
had
I'll
abandoned
kill you. Thank you, Miss
traditional
Ebola.
family life, they would still become brides in their new
We
sect,
snap noodles here.
brides of Christ, a spiritual marriage which could maintain their
Sex is
divinity,
defined as between a
still
man and a woman,
provide
so what the women were doing wasn't sex.
with
It was actually
respect
considered
to
sodomy,
husband.
apparently.
Being slightly facetious, but I
Any
think to some extent does
non-procreational
reflect the
sex,
feeling
even
in
if it's
Roman
between a man and
society
woman or
that
between
who
a woman
stepped
and a
too
woman,
far
it's sodomy.
outside of her
Doesn't even have to go in a
assigned
butthole.
role could be a source of shame.
The hot
Monks
sin of
had more
sodomy.
variable careers than nuns. They could move from one monastery to another, and from a solitary to a communal life. Some were even parachuted into the ecclesiastical hierarchy.
Oh my
when
god,
an
I wish they were
important
actually
bishopric
parachuted in.
became vacant. Men could also more easily leave their monastery and travel. Nuns tended to stay at the same convent for the rest of their days, and in theory, would rarely go outside.
When we finally encounter Gianni, I'll
In
distract
practice,
him by
though,
snapping the
we have many
pasta,
examples
and then
of them
deliver the
leaving
maid
peace,
outfit.
either to attend church services or visit a shrine, or to be present at funerals or tend to the sick.
He's gonna be like
And
weeping on his
visiting
knees,
one's
like.
family was also permitted, but usually 2 other nuns would go with you to ensure you returned.
Oh.
But what about daily life? To discover more about this, why don't we turn again to hagiography? Not to the distant past, or a fabulous story of the miraculous, but instead right to the middle of the Byzantine narrative we know so well. Let's go to the 9th century and the island of Aegina, near Athens.
I feel like I got the planes of his face a little messed up, but that's okay. I think I'm gonna give him a
Theodora was born in 812 AD on the island of Aegina. Her mother died.
Alright, we
when
got
she
the
was
basics
young,
down.
and her father
Now we
eventually
actually
left
make
to
it look
become a monk.
not insane.
Theodora's family were well connected, and she was raised by her godmother. She was married to a local nobleman, and all seemed set fair for a happy life. But it was around this time that Arab pirates landed on Crete. From this base,
Good
they
pussy be warm
terrorized
as
the
fuck.
islands of the Aegean,
You should feel bad, but like,
Aegina.
not too bad.
Many people were killed, including Theodora's brother, while others were dragged off into slavery. To escape these attacks, Theodora and her husband moved to Thessaloniki, where they had other family they could lean on. Though they were safe in their new surroundings, their
What
life
if he snapped his
continued
neck?
to be touched by tragedy. They had 3 children, but the younger 2 did not survive infancy.
Trying to decide if that looks
Though
better.
deep in grief, Theodora kept faith in God. She told her husband that the child who had survived was a true blessing, and as such, they should dedicate her life to God in gratitude.
Yeah, once you add the little markers there, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I got
And
it.
so they took their 6-year-old daughter and gave her to a convent run by a relative.
In fact, that's probably what I will do now. Oh,
Not long afterwards, Theodora's husband died. Again in her grief, she was able to thank God that he did not die by a Saracen blade, but peacefully in her arms. This tragedy also freed her from her responsibilities as a wife. She was now able to follow her heart and become a nun. She gave away most of her property and arrived at the same convent her daughter was at.
oh, that's so
Demand
sad. Like,
to
this
be
lesbian was like, I really
Anna,
like the guy I
the
married,
abbess,
and I
and
don't
a
want to hurt
relative
his feelings,
counseled
so I'm
her
going to wait
to
until he
give it some
dies before I
time,
go to
but Theodora
the convent.
refused to wait.
I'm sorry, I'm never
She
going to stop
donated
referring to nuns
100
as
gold
lesbians.
coins
It's very
and
mean, but
3 maidservants to the convent, took her vows, and became a nun at the age of 25. Theodora willingly
I think I
took
like
on
that
the
slightly
labours
lower
of her
color.
calling, grinding grain, making bread, and cooking. Her servants would once have done all this for her. She also used to go to the marketplace and carry wood and other supplies on her back. People would recognize her and ask why on earth she was demeaning herself like this, but she would ignore them and focus
No,
on
fuck
what's at
off.
hand. Her goal, like all those who took
Boil
holy
yourself
orders,
like a
was
lobster.
to rid themselves of the vanity and sinfulness of their past life and become more pleasing to God. But some instincts are harder to overcome than others. Theodora's weakness was her love for her child. Her
that
daughter was in the
weak
same
wench.
doing the same manual labor she was. Theodora couldn't help herself and asked Anna to ease her daughter's burden, to find her better clothes to wear, or even to transfer her to another convent.
Typical weak
But
woman
Anna,
looking
seeing
after
these
her
concerns
child.
of
I'm going to
God and the
throw
devil,
up.
counseled Theodora that her daughter's welfare should not be her concern. Everyone in the convent was living the same life for the same noble purpose.
This is like
But
the
Theodora
saving
kept
someone's
paying
life
attention to her
outside of
daughter,
your lifeguard
caring
zone.
for her. And so Anna felt she had to act. She forbid them from speaking to one another. As if this
That
penance
is so funny.
wasn't harsh enough, she made the two women live in the same room and work together every day for 15 years. The pair would spend their days side by side, grinding grain, spinning wool, but in silence, and never looking directly at the other.
It's alright.
The penance was designed to force them to forget their family loyalty, since it was obstructing their true obedience to their superior and to God. After 15 years, Theodora fell ill, and the other nuns begged their superior to release the penance. She did, and mother and daughter were able to converse, but they would never again refer to one another by those family designations. As the text says, the Blessed Theodora, through her total submission and true humility, totally destroyed and trampled underfoot every proud vanity and arrogance that is hateful to God, and banished all passions from her body and soul through the power of the Holy Spirit, which guided and protected her. On another occasion, Theodora moved.
I
her
imagine if you
mattress
showed,
and some water spilled
like,
on the floor nearby.
A cloistered nun, like a
For seeking
rave, they
selfish
would like
comfort
faint on the spot.
And not asking permission, Theodora was ordered to spend the night in the courtyard. It was snowing that night. So obedient was she that the superior thought she saw rays of heavenly light shining down on the shivering figure.
Alright, calm down.
She soon called Theodora in from the cold, aware that God had special things in mind for this one. As she grew older and more respected, Theodora was offered the chance to become abbess herself.
I'm overworking this face a bit.
But turned them down. Instead, she stayed to see Anna, her superior, become old and senile. Theodora cared for her until
Handsome.
she died, even when she
This
yelled
might be
and
one of the
hit
ones that I spend a
in her
little bit of
confused
extra
state.
time on in the end.
Theodora lived to be 80
Just to
herself,
get it.
and saw her own daughter become
But we got a
abbess
couple more
of
minutes
the
here.
convent. In her old age, Theodora was an example to all, and when she died, she was sincerely mourned.
I made him very pretty. Let's try
But
and mask him up again.
9 days after her death, the lamp above her tomb started to do something strange. It seemed
Oh,
to
we zoomed
burn
out. Don't
brighter
like it.
than was possible, and the oil inside it never diminished. Eventually, without ever being refilled,
Oh no, I
it
gave him
began to
library in
gush
here.
forth oil. The nuns were astonished, and when people outside the convent heard about the miracle, they queued around the block to see it. Once inside, people demanded to be anointed in the oil that came from Theodora's lamp. Soon, those who were sick or who were possessed by demons came to Theodora's tomb and were healed. On another occasion, an icon painter had a vision of the church and came to see the tomb. There he made an accurate likeness of Theodora, despite never having seen her. People continued to come to her tomb, seeking her help,
Corrupting
and
the
oil
nuns.
in the lamp continues to burn to this very day. Theodora was a real person. I left out whole sections of the story where the relatives of Anna, the convent superior, are described, one of whom was Archbishop of Thessalonica. Far from the humble nobodies we heard about last episode, Theodora was clearly the celebrated daughter of an important ecclesiastical family. Her story is told in part to help cement the family legacy, rather than a popular story told
Okay, and
around
now let's actually
campfires
fix
about
the hair here. Let's
women
get
who
some
dressed
reference.
as men or survived in the desert. This is more like an authorized biography, paid for by the family, who likely owned or at least controlled the convent itself. We'll talk about the attempt to sanctify her as we go, but what we have here is as close as we'll get to the life story of a real Middle Byzantine woman, and it seems likely that the outline of her life is true. Let's go through her story and see what insights we glean about women's lives and the workings of a convent. We began with the Arab attacks launched from Crete, which were very real, and as you can imagine, those with means emigrated to safer climes. 2 of Theodora's 3 children then die young, which was entirely to be expected, as the grim statistics we've discussed in the past indicate. She then decides to dedicate her remaining daughter to God by giving her to the convent. This happened throughout Byzantine history, and it's hard to tell how often it was done for the pious reasons described here. Poverty was probably the most likely reason. A tragic note found in a Bulgarian Bible from this period recorded the sale of a child to a monastery so that the mother could afford to survive. Even better off families might decide that they couldn't afford a dowry and encourage their daughters to choose a religious life instead, while some girls who were afflicted by disease or disability and were considered unlikely to marry would find a new home inside a convent. Theodora herself then joins the convent when her husband dies. For many women, this was the most likely time to consider taking holy orders. Piety was obviously a motivating factor, but the convent might also seem like a better alternative to widowhood. Being a widow could be a vulnerable time. Assuming you weren't rich, you now had to think about how to provide for yourself. If you had grown-up children, you might turn to them to take care of you, but this has its downsides, forcing you to adapt to another family's ways. Remarriage was an option which many took, but this also meant stepping into a new home with new rules.
What was wrong with your script? Well, okay, you don't have to tell us exactly what was wrong with your script, but...
who might compete with the ones you already have.
Fuck math.
For attention and resources.
The meowing
Theodora
nuns?
was only 25 when she joined the convent, but after bearing 3 children and losing 2 of them...
Oh, that's funny, Garnet.
why she might not want to marry again. Theodora's path into the convent is smoothed by her family connections and by her donation of 100 gold coins and 3 maidservants. This was clearly
3 maidservants?
Since she also gave other possessions to the poor. The 3 maidservants are presumably slaves who will now work for the convent until they are given the chance to take vows themselves. The deal she strikes is obviously one only the well-off could make, and it seems pretty typical for elite women across Byzantine history. Private monasteries and convents were often founded by the wealthy as a sort of family shrine and trust fund. It allowed patriarchs and matriarchs to keep favorite assets out of the hands of the tax collectors,
giving them huge
by
wet
dedicating
eyes.
them to the service of God.
Sad cat eyes.
Founded would then honor their memory
Excuse me.
and provide a comfortable retirement home for any members of the extended family who wanted to end their days there. Though she didn't take vows, Anna Komnene lived in apartments on a monastic property in Constantinople. And despite the ideal described in this story, that all would live in the same manner, the reality was clearly different. Rich women could enter certain convents and enjoy preferential treatment, including bringing servants with them and eating in their own apartments. For the elite women we know about, the arrangement they made with a convent was fairly explicit. They donated large sums of money or property to the abbess in exchange for free social care as they aged and commemoration when they died. For people in the medieval world, this was a very good deal. They knew from experience that death could come suddenly out of the blue, or be a long, drawn-out affair with great discomfort. Then, once they were gone, they were quickly forgotten. The convent offered protection, comfort, and recognition. Your fellow sisters would pray for your soul and tell the story of your life long after you were gone. It's entirely possible that Theodora and her daughter, being so young, really did work hard in the convent, but it could also be the case that they had a much easier life than the one described. In fact, the elaborate penance, where the two spent 15 years not speaking to one another, could be a fiction designed to brush away cries of nepotism. After all, Theodora's daughter was the abbess when her tomb started performing miracles. Which is a weird coincidence, isn't it? In terms of daily life, we get some good details that chime with other information we have. Theodora grinds grain, makes bread, cooks, cleans, spins wool, and fetches wood from the market. These were communities who believed that work was a necessary part of life and attempted to be as self-sufficient as possible. In between all this work, of course, there were religious duties: singing, praying, attending services, reading scripture, and giving to the poor. It was written into the founding charters of most institutions that all leftovers must be given away each day. Some convents made clothes, baskets, and small bags to give to those in need. And on feast days, they might lay on something more special for the local community to eat.
The Munchers.
Though this life sounds little different from that on a farm, the organization of this community allowed women a degree of responsibility, autonomy, and self-expression that they might not find elsewhere in Byzantine life. Convents often controlled substantial properties which had to be managed carefully. Sometimes a male supervisor would be appointed, but sometimes the abbess would do it all herself. She would certainly be intimately involved with decision-making, record-keeping, and accounting.
Oh, accounting.
One convent's founding charter
Never minds.
insists that there must be 2 treasurers working directly for the abbess, and that they must witness
Sad
each
kitty
other's
energy.
entries into the accounts book. Once
He's
expenses
pathetic,
are paid
yeah!
off, the book must be placed under lock and key so that no one could tamper with it. These top jobs demanded that the incumbent be well educated, which not many women were given the chance to be. Convents would often teach their charges to read and write so that they could
Just a
enjoy the
light
scriptures
tinting there.
and participate more in convent life. Choir sisters and those who looked after the sanctuary and daily services would also need to be able to read and write. Musical talents were encouraged, and though little survives in terms of artistic production, we know that some nuns wrote hymns and painted icons. Others would keep archives or records, serve as gatekeepers or counselors or doctors. In addition to spiritual fulfillment, then, the convent was a space where women could develop themselves outside of the traditional roles expected of them as mother and wife. Going back to Theodora's story, her life is described in terms that fit the traditional monastic ideal, where obedience is demanded, and those in authority try to encourage their charges to improve spiritually. Our 21st century perspective might view her relationship
Gold
with her
lipstick? Oh my god,
superior
Slay
Anna as
Queen.
somewhat abusive,
So true.
where penance seems more like
You'll get a couple more
humiliation
details on
designed
his
to break the spirit rather
Under
than
Armour here,
spiritual
and
guidance towards
I
the
think in my
rules
own
of
time I'm going to
obedience.
add a couple little virtue sketches
Any
because I like the
power
idea of
dynamic
filling
is
up this
open to
space.
abuse, but it's probably worth
Let's get that
remembering
gold
that
line on
saints'
his
lives
armor.
were written by monks and nuns, and so naturally they presented life in their institution as befitting the ideals of their calling. And of course the genre of hagiography demanded suffering. Only through extremes of denial could someone receive spiritual gifts from God and become worthy of sanctity. Theodora's story
Seems
is
like a lot
far
of
more
work.
restrained than most. She performed no miracles while she was alive, nor did she go to great ascetic lengths to prove herself, or suffer much physical torment. The story probably reflects the fact that it was written within living memory of Theodora, when plenty of people remembered the real person.
Oh, so they couldn't talk shit or they couldn't make anything up.
As Anna grows old and senile, Theodora tends to her even when her mind is gone and she is hard to deal with. This is a neat demonstration of why women might prefer the security of the convent, where nuns were expected to be kind and patient, over the old age care that their own families might provide. Women were expected to take on nursing duties throughout Byzantine society. The state-funded hospitals and care homes of Constantinople were staffed by nuns and deaconesses. Major churches everywhere would provide social care to the sick and homeless, and though monks and priests did their part, women were always needed to help deal with
I think I
other
can
women
hear Miss
in
Ebola
need.
crossing her arms at this.
Finally,
She is a cardiologist.
Theodora passes away.
Do
and
you
her
feel
tomb
like you're fulfilling
begins
your
to
womanly
fill.
tasks
We've
when
talked
you're
about the
cranking
miraculous
open
in
someone's
several
chest
other
and
recent stories. A shrine with
and
a
feeling up their
reputation for
heart,
healing
Miss
would often
Ebola?
benefit
Is that your
the
nice, like,
institution
womanly
who
nursing
safeguarded
powers?
These relics. It brought a stream of visitors who would make donations and helped advertise the convent as a place where God's work was being done. Something not mentioned in Theodora's story was that convents were often decorated with the images.
I've recently discovered Eastern Orthodox Twitter, because I follow a couple of like Russian and Ukrainian artists, and they talk shit about some of like the pettiest stuff that a lot of the Eastern Orthodox Church has, like, you know, a woman holding a specific like chalice in a church. It's like, she's holding the chalice of Saint Dick and Balls. I can't believe. I'm disgusted. And I just want to show them like Miss Ebola's operating room and see what they have to say about her clutching a human heart. I mean, I bet you don't pull a lot of human hearts out of their chest in regular course of surgery, but one for the camera, please.
Female saints.
Sorry.
Saints whose life stories would be told at services
I still got the
commemorating
coughs.
their lives. Let's hear another.
It should be considered gay sex. Highly agree.
Only men are called
Yeah, show us the
to
silly
compete
clicker
in
game,
secular
Cosmic.
contests
Or
and
Astra.
prove their bodily strength. The arena of virtue, however,
You might not
is
be
open
able
to women,
to send links
no
again,
less
but
than
if
to
you
men.
DM it to
And
me, or
God,
if
the
you at me
prize
on
giver,
Twitter,
generously grants the rewards
I will
and
find it.
victory crowns to both
what do virtues
sexes
even look like?
equally.
Maybe you'll put in another 5 minutes into
So
this.
also
We'll go over a little
with
bit.
the Blessed Mary, the wonder of our generation, who is the subject of our
Well, maybe not that
discourse.
far over.
Although she was a woman, although she was married and bore children, nothing hindered her in any way from finding favor with God. Neither the weakness of nature, nor the annoyances of wedlock, nor the needs and cares of child-rearing. To the contrary, it was these things which gave her the occasion to find favor, and thus proved that those who believe and claim that such things form an obstacle to virtue are foolish and create pretexts for sin. But let us start the narration about the Blessed Woman from the beginning, as is proper.
As is proper.
Mary lived at the same time as Theodora, the 9th century. She was the
They
daughter of an
don't.
Armenian
I actually
general
only get
who'd been
asterisks,
settled in the
and I
Balkans,
don't know how
along
to
with
change
many
it.
of his companions. When she came of age, she was married to one of these Armenian soldiers now serving in the Roman army in Thrace. His name was Nicephorus, or Nikephoros. Now that she was moving about in the world, people began to notice Mary's piety.
She's so
She
pious.
was the image of meekness, the pillar of moderation, the exemplar of love of God, the model of charity, the paradigm of piety for everyone. No
How
one saw her become
nice.
even mildly angry, nor strike a servant, nor speak insults.
How nice.
She would go to church twice a day, even though this meant crossing a river and walking unaccompanied around town. Her generosity became legendary. She would turn no one away who was in need. One summer, a tax collector rounded up several debtors and threatened to drag them off into slavery if they didn't pay up. So Mary took out
She pulled out a
loans
gun.
under her own name and paid their debts. She did all this using her own dowry. She did not give away a penny of her husband's money.
Ah, so good of her.
The couple had a baby boy, but before his 5th birthday, he died. Her faith in God was such that she was able to bear the pain, knowing that she could trust in the Lord. She bore another son, while her husband fought well against the incursions of Simeon of Bulgaria. As a result, he was promoted to be the Tormarch of Vizia, a city in Thrace. The family moved there. Out of modesty, Mary stopped going to church so often, since the wife of an important man should not be seen wandering
That
the
is
streets.
so
But she continued
fuchsia.
her philanthropic ways. If the slave of a friend of hers
Go
broke something in
sleepy.
their master's home,
Who's sleeping?
she would replace it with her own money
Illusionist.
to spare them any punishment.
Have a good sleep.
She would put up monks and foreigners.
We will see you next
and
time.
continued to give generously to the poor, saving no refinement for herself. Sadly, her second child also died.
Sure.
But she
Yeah, go ahead and
again
tag me or
became
DM me, whatever.
pregnant and gave birth to twins
Whatever
who
pleases you.
survived. The devil, envious of this woman's goodness,
I hate this
stirred up
bitch.
hatred against her. It was Nikephoros' sisters who began to speak ill of Mary, claiming that she was giving away their brother's property behind his back. He was frequently away fighting, and so was primed to fear an accusation like this. Worse was to come when the sisters claimed that Mary had slept with one of Nikephoros' slaves, an accusation even worse than adultery with another free man. Nikephoros listened to his family and began to question Mary, who had of course done nothing wrong. He brought in guards to follow her around and watch her every move. Then he roughly interrogated her maidservants, who had nothing to say against her. Mary began to suffer stomach pains from the stress.
Oh, real. That's the
One
realest
her
part of this
guards then
story.
slandered her to Nikephoros, claiming that she'd called him an agent of the devil, which she had not. Furious, Nikephoros began beating her up until people came running and dragged him away. Later she tripped and fell, further injuring herself, and was bedridden for the next 10 days. Sensing her own demise, she
Oh,
called
God.
Nikephoros to her and held him to account for all that he'd done. He broke down in tears.
Oh my god, she didn't let him off the hook.
When they heard that she had passed away. To his utter shame, Nikephoros searched for clothes to bury her in, but could find none, since she had given everything that she owned away. She was buried in the local church, and that seemed to be the end of this sorry affair. 3 months later, a man possessed by a
Ooh.
demon came to the
Glassed
church
one, huh?
calling out for Mary, the wife of the Tormark. For some reason, he believed that she could help.
I like the adding like a
A crowd
like
gathered,
physicality
and soon
to
the Archbishop was
making
summoned. He
virtues.
asked the man who'd put him up to this, who'd told him to go around pretending that
Like it's a
Mary
little
was
metaphysical,
saint.
but it's also kind of literal.
For we know this woman to have been good, and her life to have been virtuous, but we cannot believe that she has been found worthy of such grace.
I think I'm
God
gonna do
has granted
one
the ability
virtue,
to
and
perform
then maybe I'll
miracles
copy and
to
paste the rest
chaste
in my
men
own
and
time.
Holy monks, martyrs. She, on the other hand,
I can keep the
lived with a
core the
man
same.
and did not change her mode of life, nor did she ever do any great or extraordinary things. Whence her power to perform miracles. Nikephoros now joined in, threatening to torture the man for speaking
Ooh.
about a woman he never knew. But the man insisted that she would.
I'm gonna
perform
call this one it
miracles,
just for now,
and that if he
but
was wrong,
I usually
they could
spend
punish him
an
however
hour
they
or two
pleased.
dressing
A
up
few Sundays later, the sick
commissions
man managed to
before
pull
I
away the
send them
door of
off.
Mary's tomb and gain access to the coffin.
put in a couple more virtues, maybe to get a
Then,
little bit of a color
bending
tint
over
going
the
on.
remains of the Blessed One, he brought her right hand to his lips,
Mhm.
whence he was made.
You're
to
so
vomit,
normal.
And apparently spitting out a stream of blood, he also
He cares for them like he does
invisibly spat out the demon
pigeons.
who was
Mm.
troubling him. All were astounded
Piggins.
at the miracle, including the Archbishop
My pleasure.
Euthemios. Stooping to look into the tomb, they saw the Blessed Woman
Yeah.
lying intact, and smelt the fragrance that issued forth.
Sorry,
Observing
fragrance.
more intently, they saw blood on her face. One of the priests, thinking that the possessed man had spat it out, tried to wipe it away with the saint's winding sheet. But the blood was vital blood and issued forth from her nostrils.
Okay.
They tearfully glorified God, who had revealed a great blessing to the city. The cured man went home, telling anyone he met about the miracle that had taken place, and soon a queue of the afflicted
Yeah, we need more
arrived at
angel
Mary's
enemies in
tomb.
Ultra Kill. I love them.
The blind, the deaf, and the sick were all cured. Eventually,
All right, this cute
even
baby.
Simeon of Bulgaria felt the power of her tomb.
This is another little gift
As his
commission.
army approached Vizier, the town emptied in fear. But as Simeon's men sacked the city, they were scared away
need this
from
outfit.
Mary's church by a jet of flame that shot from her tomb.
You should share those designs if you got them on hand. Doggy clicker be upon ye. Oh my god, doggy, doggy. Oh my god, chat. Okay, wait, hold up. Okay, hold up. How do I open this without doxing everybody in my DMs?
As you can probably tell, I'm
Shut the hell up. Let's see. This is incredible. This is incredible. You can hear it. Oh, there we go. Alright, here we go. Check this shit out. Yeah! Yeah, 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 yeah! Yeah, yeah, yeah! 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 Magnificent. Now let's look at your code. I can't remember anything about code. I'm sure it's strong. My pleasure. Mycelium Network, have a good rest of your day. Enjoy for dinner. We'll be here for another hour or so if you pop back, but I'll see you next time. Dinner. What should I have for dinner? Oh, podcast.
skipping a lot of detail when it comes to the miracle stories,
Sounds like he's wrapping
since
it up.
that's not our concern today. And as you could probably tell from the direct quotes I used, this is the story of an ordinary housewife who became a saint. Something that was so unusual, the author of the text needed to justify it. This is not the only tale of a pious housewife from this period. According to scholars, what we're seeing is the growing importance of family during the 9th and 10th
It's about
century.
family.
You may remember this was the time when last names began appearing in our histories. The magnate families who led the counterattack against the Arab Emirates had begun to build reputations that they hoped would help them monopolize key commands. Nikephoros is an Armenian immigrant, like many of the great Byzantine generals. Mary is from his extended clan. They have been uprooted and moved to the Balkans, where a saint in the family might help establish a new identity. Since this story is not rooted in a convent like Theodora's, it's hard to know how much of the detail we should believe. Plenty of it sounds plausible, and the description of Mary's
Trying to
death
figure out how to
sounds
do a
like it's been
humaniform design,
watered down
but
to
doing
save
the fox
Nikephoros
jump
from
here.
being accused of murder, although I suppose her suffering could have been increased to justify her sainthood. The story goes on to recount the lives of her two sons, one a monk and one
And then
a
also
soldier,
make it cute.
and it seems likely that they were the ones
They'll
who
figure it out.
established her sanctity and began to tell her life story. And perhaps between them, they agreed.
I could also
how
just make her a
exactly
cute little
they would
fox.
like
You know what, maybe
her
we'll just turn
mother's
her into a
death
fox
to be
proper.
called.
Or like a quad.
She clearly was remembered
Trip
fondly
pet.
by the local community, who seem to have been deeply shocked by her death. I wanted to relate this story to show that female sanctity did evolve over time in Byzantium. Miraculous feats of suffering or denial were not always demanded. Sometimes a community simply recognized an ordinary person for being exceptionally kind and generous. But I also think this story illustrates other potential avenues that led women to abandon family life and join a convent. Victims of domestic abuse and bad marriages found the nunnery a place of refuge. Women who were left with unpayable debts or were forced to become refugees could find safety. Convents also became the home of the disabled and the mentally ill. In all these stories of demonic possession, we may be hearing exaggerated tales of those who suffered from misunderstood medical conditions. In one account, we hear what sounds an awful lot like Tourette's syndrome. The evil spirit continually lived with her for 13 years and did not cease night and day to shout disgusting and uncouth words through her mouth, a strange sight for those who met with her, and a really unpleasant encounter for travellers. Sometimes it cursed those who passed by, sometimes it howled like a dog or uttered unintelligible and inarticulate sounds, sometimes it burst out in sardonic laughter, and other times it wept. These poor people did not always enter a convent willingly. Some would have been dumped there by exasperated families. Prostitutes were sometimes dispatched to a convent to be reformed, as were other petty criminals or those accused of heresy. Political exiles and even deposed empresses might be sent to island convents where nuns would be posted as guards to keep an eye on them as they adjusted to their new life. The convent, then, stood as the catch-all home for women who didn't fit into the 4 roles which society expected of them: virgin, wife, mother, widow. For good and bad, the convent was a place to escape this confinement. Some hated the restrictive embrace of a religious order, while for many it was a liberation and a chance to develop in ways that weren't possible anywhere else, even to rise to the heights of sainthood and to be celebrated by men and women alike. For us, the convent and its stories remain the best way to gain insight into the lives
gimme
of
those
ordinary
designs.
Byzantine women. There is only one other route that allows us greater access, but it does not feature anything ordinary.
You have to kill a man.
In part 3, we look at women who rose to the highest of heights, the role of empress.
I could do
And
that.
one woman in particular who established the possibilities that this station had to offer.
God, foxes are so silly. Let's see. I think we're going to go circle back around to the real first episode of Women in the Roman World, which I think is a little bit more about day to day rather than stations. Let's pull this one up. Ah, my bones. Ooh, yeah, these ones. I think I've seen these ones around. Oh, these go so hard.
Byzantine.
Oh my god, these were from last year. Get out of here.
Episode 7. Women.
Yeah.
Roman World.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, me when I step on a Lego.
1. The lesson.
I'm okay.
The aim of the Byzantine Stories series is to explore daily life in the Roman Empire. Initially, I assumed I'd be able to produce
You stepped on
one-off
a Lego.
episodes focusing on a particular character, but so far that's only been possible once. For most subjects, 2 episodes have been necessary to provide context for their life, and in the case of a big topic like healthcare, we've needed 3.
Healthcare.
As I approached the subject of
People
Roman
don't need
women,
healthcare.
I quickly realized that even 3 was going to be inadequate. And that's a good thing. To produce even a surface-level study of Roman women, half the number of all Romans who ever lived, should take a long time. But to cover a whole gender across a couple of 1,000 years is still daunting. And in order to understand women's lives in Byzantium, we have to go back to Republican Rome and ancient Greece in order to see what's changed and what hasn't. We also need to contrast a pagan world to a Christian one.
Pagans.
To some extent, east to west. It's obvious to anyone who listens to the narrative episodes that women are largely absent from the story. The wives of famous men are sometimes mentioned, And in the case of the imperial family, they may play a role in politics, but for almost all other women, there is nothing to say. These episodes will attempt to fill that silence, both by telling the stories of Roman women and by explaining the reasons behind their absence from the history books.
What could that be?
As a result of all this heavy lifting, this three-part series will only take us up to the early 5th century. In part 1, we'll talk about the structural ways in which women's lives were different to men's. In part 2, we'll explore the specifics of daily life for a Roman woman. And in part 3, we'll meet some of the women who were able to break through the silence of historians and have their lives recorded for posterity.
I like her little tongue sticking out. Yeah. Maybe she's like licking her chops. Here. Me when there's a mouse under the snow.
It's something we all know and take for granted, that in the past, women were considered inferior to men. Today, the debate about gender is a very complicated and emotive topic.
However, I'm taking a stance that women are, in fact, not superior to men. Imagine if he pulled that one out.
That was not the case amongst the educated of the ancient world. Gender differences were seen as natural and unchanging. Male, Greek, and Roman writers repeatedly claim, in one form or another, that women were the inferior, the lesser, the secondary.
It was to the point in Byzantium, like there's a famous female historian from like the Middle Ages of Byzantium, so I think like between like 900 and 1200 or something AD, and she, in order to write her histories, which she lived through, about her own, I think her own father was possibly emperor or, like a second-hand man to the emperor. But in order to do that, she would have to break into these, like, short stints of, like, being womanish on the page, like, lamenting, like, oh, my God, it's so sad, all this stuff that happened to my poor father, because he was, like, usurped and killed or something. And then she would, like, switch back into an authorial tone as a normal historian would sound. But she had to have that outpouring of emotion because it was expected and considered pious for a woman to be like lamenting and being hysterical to the point where, again, she wrote it down in her histories.
Coloured every aspect of Roman society, from religion and science to politics and the family home. Everywhere, life was organised to keep women in a subordinate role and reinforce the wisdom of this natural order. Consciously and subconsciously, the subjugation of women was ever present.
But, like, not in a fun, hot way.
The most obvious features of this second-class status were the public roles denied to women. In Republican Rome, women could not vote. They could not hold public office. They could not take part in most of the major religious cults. They couldn't join the army. They couldn't serve on a jury or plead a case that involved a male counterpart. Those were the basic restrictions on a woman's life choices, leaving most of them the obvious option of staying at home to be wife, mother, and overseer of the family estate. The legal obstacles to a woman doing anything else were matched by moral rhetoric, encouraging her to take pride in the life of homemaker. As we'll get into in part 2, women did have a place in the religious life of the city, and many were involved in business. But for the vast majority of women across the whole of Roman history, the home was where they would be found. This is not news to you, I'm sure, but I think it's worth just lingering on those basic restrictions a little longer. Not only did they deny women a role in public life, but they also denied them access to money. And as in most societies, it's cash that allows an individual
Cold,
to act with
hard
more independence.
cash.
So to go back to the basics of public life, citizens were often bribed to vote a certain way, or if not bribed directly, they found a place inside their tribe or behind their patron to gain benefits from their political support. Once in office, a man would be paid or given gifts in order to secure his cooperation. Those serving in a pagan priesthood would be tipped to ensure that the day's auguries proved propitious. Lawyers made a great living, as they do today, because of their command of a complex subject. And then you have the army. Not only did soldiers receive pay, but they were in prime position to extort wealth from friend and foe alike. The military was also the place where those from humble backgrounds had the greatest opportunity to change their fortunes. By denying women access to these roles, they
I should
remained
take a
financially
sneepy.
dependent on the men.
Youch!
Whether it was their husband,
Go to bed!
father, he was their only reliable source of income.
Have a little
So,
sleepy eepy.
His fortunes and personality dictated their ability to access the money they need to make their own decisions. This inequality between the sexes was justified and reinforced in a number of ways. Through custom, through law, through philosophical and religious teaching, and through the writing of history. Today's episode is going to
Good
be
night.
pretty gloomy as we explore
Oh,
just
yeah,
how
baby.
limited a woman's horizon was.
You're stepping out at just the right time.
Was reinforced.
We're on the Depresso
Next
episode.
episode we'll be able to add a little more light to this picture, exploring the ways men and women actually lived day to day, and getting to know women who broke the mold. But for now, we need to see how the mold was made and kept in place. Let's begin with the evidence that we're using. We have a wide range of tools for uncovering the past, from gravestones to coins to household items we've dug up or graffiti scrawled on walls. But when we turn to our largest source of direct information, the written word, we come across an immediate stumbling block. 99% of written information was authored by men. We almost never hear from women firsthand, and even when women are described in detail, we only hear about them through the lens of a male writer. Of the actual woman, all we get is a ricochet, says historian Paul Crystal. The description of female behavior is not only transmitted to us in a man's words, but also shaped by his perspective of how women should behave, or what their motivations might have been.
Interesting.
Often a woman is only described in detail when her behavior reflects negatively or positively on their husband or father. Pericles, the great Athenian statesman, summed up the ideal situation when he said that women should not be talked about, either in good or bad terms. If the absence of women from our story is the ideal situation, you get a sense of the problems historians have in reconstructing women's lives. Why did Pericles think it best not to discuss women? Essentially, he was saying that if a woman behaved well, there would be nothing to comment on, and if they behaved badly, that would reflect poorly on her husband. And even beyond that,
Won't
bland
someone please
standard,
think of the
the
husbands?
ancient ideal of masculinity was that a man would be in control of his household. There was no need for women to be seen, even doing good, if their husband had his affairs under control. Through analysis of Roman writing, a picture emerges of a fragile and highly conservative form of masculinity which shaped the ideal of male behavior. A Roman man should at all times be in and under control. He was hard in every sense, physically strong and indefatigable, mentally stern.
God,
and
that's so much
unyielding.
work.
This type of male temperament is the norm and the ideal. The opposite of this, the weak and cowardly, the emotional and flaky, is the worst kind of temperament possible. And who would most often be viewed in those terms?
Me.
Women.
Flaky.
Women
I am a
who
flake.
had no experience of public life or the battlefield, who ideally spent their lives at home avoiding danger, were then derided for their lack of bravery and confident public speaking. Femininity is to some extent the absence of proper behavior. When a man acts scared or shows emotion, he's often described as displaying womanish qualities, whereas when a woman shows courage and strength, she is temporarily adopting masculine behavior. As historian Eve Dambra puts it, the trusted woman was an honorary male. This gendered definition of proper behavior makes it hard to know how real women behaved or what people at the time thought of them. The rebellion of the British chieftain Boudica, or Boadicea, is a good example. You may recall that in the 1st century AD, she led a rebellion that had the Emperor Nero openly questioning whether to abandon the island.
You get him,
The
sister.
historian Cassius Dio praised her masculine qualities, saying that she had greater intelligence than often belongs to women.
Thanks.
But her rebellion failed, leaving Roman writers in no doubt as to why. For a woman to be in charge was to break the natural order of things.
Agents
She
of
had
women are
emasculated
agents
her
of
own
chaos, I
subjects and
told
brought
you.
chaos to their lives. This is the conclusion of Tacitus, who also points out that Boudica committed suicide with poison,
Oh, what
a
a
woman's way out.
what a weak
Whereas
bitch.
one of the Roman officers, who disobeyed orders, used his own sword
God,
to end his life.
sorry I don't have a sword.
Even a dishonorable Roman was more of a man than Boudica. Literature then holds up a distorted mirror to the female sex. Women were damned for being who they were, and damned for imitating men too closely. And since male authors all agreed on the natural order of things, no female writer would be taken seriously for claiming otherwise. Literary descriptions of women's inferiority were backed up by the medical profession. Again, men were the norm and women a deviation. Aristotle described women as half-cooked, undercooked men.
We're getting roasted, girls.
Effective mates. And this theory proved influential. You may remember the concept of the 4 humours from our episode on Roman healthcare, the belief that disease was caused by an imbalance of fluids within the body. Because of
Your fluids are messed up, woman.
Menstruation, it was easy to cast them as inferior. Men's bodies were in perfect harmony, whereas women were poorly ordered, constantly in need of realignment of their fluid levels.
Sorry.
Male
I'm thinking in terms of cars, like,
fluids
your
of
your
menstrual
fluids
blood
are weird.
is common across most ancient cultures. Women were regularly declared unclean and excluded from common spaces during their period or childbirth. Pliny, in his Natural History, sums up the worst of superstition when he writes that a menstruating woman can turn wine and milk sour, make seeds go sterile, knives become blunt, and cause grass to wither. These beliefs, presumably common amongst the uneducated, were outshone in their bigotry by the highest medical authorities. Our old friend Galen, the greatest physician of Antonine Rome, declared that women were not just inferior males, but a negative version of them. His animal dissections led him to conclude that female genitalia was an inversion of the male. It was so undercooked that it had remained inside the body rather than protruding out. To most medical authorities, the male body was clearly superior because it produced more heat. Heat was, after all, the primary instrument of nature, so this seemed self-evident. A man's testes produced
Whoa.
warm, life-creating sperm.
Oh, how does he know it's
Whole
warm?
ovaries produced only tepid liquid, which was useless in procreation.
Tepid
In
juice.
fact, the
Oh.
conclusion was reached by many that only the man's semen contributed
Yeah.
to the substance of the child.
They got a couple of hundred
The
years to
woman
catch up on, a couple
merely
thousand
provided
years.
the space for the child to grow. It's worth saying that these theories do not necessarily represent the attitude of everyday physicians and midwives, but it's important to understand the intellectual culture which shaped educated attitudes towards women.
The pregnancy thing definitely actually kind of surprises me. I did not know that like you couldn't take communion after pregnancy or giving birth. You thought they would be like, yeah, pregnancy, but
tales of Hesiod and Homer
like give her a break.
influential across the Roman world and particularly relevant to Greek-speaking Byzantium. Here, Zeus, king of the gods, not only satisfies himself by having children with female partners, he also gives birth himself.
Oh,
He produces his daughter Athena from his head and his son Dionysus from his thigh. Scholars suggest that these stories represent a move away from goddess worship and a celebration of the womb as the creator of life towards the worship of God.
Oh my
the
God.
Father, the male intellect.
They were so
or being
grossed
more
out by
pronounced
wombs
than
that
the
they were like, no, 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 no.
woman's body. Hence, Athena is born from Zeus's head.
That is so funny.
You might think that Athena, goddess of wisdom, handicraft, and warfare, would be a good female role model. She was, after all, the legendary founder of Athens and the sponsor of Odysseus. However, her success seems to be derived from her denial of her femininity. She dresses as a warrior and disguises herself as a man on several occasions. She also remains unmarried, and of course was not born of woman. Avoiding the lack of cleanliness that this fact entails, she seems to affirm that male qualities are better and that the man is the true parent.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's it's gross.
You can see the enormous influence.
But
this
I'd presume if you were a
has
medical
on
professional, it'd be
our
less gross.
definition of normal
Oh, you ever see that Miracle of Birth video? The one from the 70s? Oh, God.
Elsewhere, we see a disparity between the
That was a
roles
fun
given
biology
to
class.
male and female deities. Zeus, Apollo, and other male gods enjoy full lives, able to make love and war at their pleasure, to consort with mortals or other gods, and wreak havoc or revenge without fear of punishment. Their female counterparts, by contrast, are characterized as one-note.
Blood gushing!
Aphrodite focuses on sexual matters, using her frivolous, deceitful character
That was
to
a
make fools of
fun
men.
class.
Hera, Zeus's wife, remains loyal to him while he has a string of affairs. Her only revenge is to attack the offspring of these unions rather than the wielder of lightning bolts himself.
Oh, okay, I
As
can't blame her for
historian
that.
Sarah Pomeroy wryly notes, modern women can still be forced to choose between these archetypes. They can be asexual, career-minded Athenas, sex object Aphrodites, or respectable matron Heras. If you combine these characteristics, you would get a fully realized personality, the kind of personality that Zeus or Apollo get to display. Male insecurity in the face of fully realized women is at the heart of these portrayals. Other stories showcase these fears in creative ways.
Oh,
Odysseus's 10-year
no way,
campaign
yeah, it's
is
nuts.
replete with
It's not even like the
women.
usual stuff. There's so many
Silence
hidden
who lure
pockets
men
of
to their
like
death
what your
that
body
leave
goes
the
through.
scene. Circe, who turns them into swine, and Calypso, the seductress, who keeps him captive for year after year.
Like
Greek mythology
women who
has
have
its own
repeat
Eve,
pregnancies
too.
might actually be
Pandora
God's strongest
ascends to
soldiers, because
punishment
fuck
for Zeus
that.
to make the life the box or jar she opens releases evil into the world. The Pandora story has interesting parallels with the Garden of Eden.
Gonna call
In
our
both
moms
cases,
tonight
the
and be like,
metaphor of
ugh.
forbidden fruit or Pandora's box is clearly about sex.
The more I learn, the
Once
more I'm
common
horrifying.
knowledge
Yeah.
is had, people will commit all sorts of heinous acts.
It is
as a result.
ballsy.
The blame is laid squarely at the door of women, not men, for the bad things that follow. It's also interesting that in both stories it is female curiosity that is at fault. If women were more obedient and knew their place, it
Yeah,
seems
that's
why
what I'm
it
always saying.
happens so often.
Oh, women.
You can draw many more conclusions.
I can
from
believe that.
Pandora.
Yeah, like the human brain can really
Women
forget
can't be
pain.
trusted.
Like it's
Women
very,
can't
very
be
good at forgetting pain.
Women should not be given access to power. All women are thus tarnished by the actions of one, a pattern you see throughout literature, where men curse womanhood itself for the perceived sins of one they know intimately. The playwright Menander
Don't know if I'm getting
captures
this
one
pattern
strain of
quite
thought
right, but that's
neatly when
okay.
he says, "A man who teaches a woman to write should recognize that he's providing poison to an asp." Pandora is also a stereotype of the worst kind of woman, from a male point of view. Pretty to look at, rotten on the inside.
Oh.
She is likely to seduce a good man and then abandon him, just like Helen of Troy.
Oh, that bitch.
One of the most famous women in literature, her infidelity led to a decade-long war that cost many lives. Roman culture was infused with messages indicating that women outside the home were nothing but trouble.
We're super yuckers. What's up, Doom and Vega? Wow, Vega from Doom here. It's pretty rough. It's pretty rough.
As those stories suggest, female infidelity was at the heart.
Yeah, again, this is the cheerful episode.
Evolutionary theorists suggest that this is a fairly straightforward thought process. Men want to pass on their life's work, their property, their legacy, to a son of their own. Given how short, fragile life is, this is a strong desire. One of the biggest threats to this would be if a wife was unfaithful, forcing her husband to unknowingly
Well,
raise
honk.
another man's son. This deep-seated fear is at the heart of the lives of women in Roman society. Women were generally married off as soon as puberty appeared. This shortened the window in which she might behave inappropriately. Marriage was not seen as a romantic commitment between loving individuals. It was seen as a business transaction.
Oh, yeah.
A union designed to cement political or business alliances while providing the man with offspring.
Oh, yeah, have some offspring, yeah.
The two would get on and she would become a trusted confidant, but the reality was often less rosy. The system was designed to keep men in strong and peaceful relationships with one another. It wasn't intended to provide for female happiness. And because a woman was not in fact a piece of movable wealth, because she was a person with feelings and preferences of her own,
She's what?
men who'd expected a compliant and obedient spouse were often disappointed. Many writers expressed the sentiments of this bitterness. Another playwright, Euripides, said, "A man is best off with a non-entity. A woman who sits in the house, useless stupidity."
Oh, man.
Again,
This is
blame
brutal.
relationships being placed on the woman. And the self
These Greek
prophecy that
playwrights,
women
dog,
with
they
denied
are
education
not
and
happy.
public life would appear less intelligent than their husband. The law.
Sorry, this is what, like, white supremacists want? This is what all those return to tradition guys are like?
Women were
Really?
expected to be virgins on their wedding days. If this was discovered not to be the case, she would be returned to her parents with much shame.
Oh,
If
I
a
can turn
wife
it up.
failed to produce offspring, she could be divorced on the grounds of infertility. At least her family would get her dowry back in those cases. If she committed adultery, she would lose it. In fact, when Augustus reformed the laws, he compelled men to divorce women who'd cheated on them. Needless to say, men were not held to the same standard. If a man was a known philanderer, then his wife's parents might be able to force through a divorce.
Philandering.
But really, only if he was sleeping with women from other free families. His sexual encounters with prostitutes and slaves were beneath the eyes of the law. The point of marriage was to produce legitimate offspring. Children the man might conceive on the side were largely irrelevant. The paterfamilias, the male head of the household, technically had the power of life and death over those living in his home. In practice, most men didn't rule with terror over their families, but this theoretical power allowed men to strictly control their homes and indulge in what we would think of as abuse. The master would expect to have sexual access to all his slaves without any legal repercussions, whereas his wife could be prosecuted if she did the same. The paterfamilias also had the power to expose newborn infants. This was a practice which went on throughout our period, including the Christian era. Justinian's law codes both forbid the act and discuss what to do with children who were scooped up and raised by neighbours, showing that despite the ban, many people continued to do so. Disabled or deformed children were likely to be victims of this practice, but it also disproportionately affected the female sex. Boys were always more desirable. They would be heir to the estate and able to win glory for the family, whereas girls were often seen as an expensive burden. Each daughter would have to be provided with a dowry once she got married, so having too many girls could ruin you. The state fully supported this logic. A law attributed to Romulus demanded that fathers raise all boys they conceived, but only the first girl. This male dominance over a household was not universal, as we'll get to in subsequent episodes, but the theoretical framework was heavily skewed
Just want
in
to
that
lighten the
direction,
mood by saying Gianni literally
casting
does all the
a
housework in
shadow
this house.
over the behaviour of both sexes. There is also another rather obvious fact of daily life, which reflects this sense of a woman as
All right, there you go,
transactable
baby.
material.
Gives them a little
Generally
napkin,
speaking,
like a tied
Roman
napkin
men
around a
had
stick.
3 names.
Get out there.
Women, only 2. Gaius Julius Caesar, Marcus Tullius Cicero. The first name is how a man would be addressed by friends and family, Gaius or Marcus. The second name is the gens, or wider family name, usually showing descent from a common ancestor. So Caesar was from the Julii clan, who traced their origins back to the absorption of Alba Longa into the Republic. Whereas the gens Tullia went back to about 500 BC and had patrician and plebeian branches.
Pretty fox, thank you.
Our Cicero was born.
She is really cute. I love this design.
The third name was the particular family
Little
of
hearts.
the individual, so the Caesar family of the wider Julii clan. Cicero had a son who he duly named Marcus Tullius Cicero Minor, or
And
the
get
younger.
a little bit of shading on her, and
His
then I
daughter,
think I'm going to draw a
however,
little mouse.
is simply referred to as Tullia. Caesar's daughter was similarly known just as Julia. She might formally be known as Julia Caesaris, but she received no unique first name that we know of. In a sense, these are just women of their clan. An individual first name isn't necessary because her identification is to the man who controls her destiny. She is Julia, daughter of Caesar. When she marries, she will be Julia, wife of Pompey. Academics speculate about whether these women had informal first names that their family called them at home, but the fact that historians don't record this is telling. In families rich enough to afford multiple daughters, the same name would continue to be used. The girls simply received a number or cognomen to distinguish them from the other females of their family. Domitia Lepida the elder, Aemilia Tertia, Agrippina the younger. These designations are not far off the traditional naming pattern for slaves. Gaipor was the slave of Gaius, Marcipor the slave of Marcus.
You mean
and so on.
slaves didn't even get to keep their names,
The
dog?
sternest reading of the situation might conclude that a woman should be seen and not heard, never talked about, and denied a basic identity.
I wish the music that they had playing in between here was like rock music. E.
Despite all this prejudice, the Romans did not exclude women from their own mythology. On the contrary, they played a vital role in the tales which told how their city had been founded and how the Republic should ideally function. Wrapped up in these tales is the vision of the ideal Roman woman. We've seen all the negative framing of female nature. What was the positive side? What did the Romans want women to behave like if they were able to overcome their flawed nature? As you may recall, Rome was sacked in 390 BC, destroying records of what life in the early Republic was like. So the stories of Romulus and Remus and all that follows come down to us through stories written down in the late Republic and early Imperial era. Romulus founded his city by inviting in anyone looking for a new home. This motley crew were mostly men, and so they stole the wives of the nearby Sabines in order to make their city complete. Naturally, the Sabine men came looking for vengeance. It was the women who put an end to the fighting, accepting their abduction and forced marriage to the Romans, and urging their own fathers and brothers to make peace. In a similar vein, the Republic itself was birthed by an assault on a woman. The story goes that the son of the last king of Rome, Tarquin, took a liking to Lucretia, the wife of the city prefect. He threatened her with violence, and so she slept with him. As soon as he was gone, she told her family what had happened, and then killed herself. Her justification for her suicide was that she had been party to adultery. Naturally, her family assured her this was not how they saw what had happened. She was clearly the wronged party. But Lucretia insisted that she had no interest in her good name being used to justify the adultery of less noble women. She would rather die than live with the shame of being involved in the incident. Her deeply unjust death provoked a strong reaction against the Tarquins, and they were eventually ousted from Rome and the Republic founded. I imagine you're fairly outraged yourself upon hearing that one, but before we get into it, let's just cover a couple more. In the 480s BC, the Roman general Coriolanus marched on Rome and besieged the city. He was eventually talked down by a delegation of the city's women, including his own wife and mother. And finally, a definitely historical figure, Cornelia Africana, daughter of Scipio
My finest work, I
Africanus.
think.
She was the mother of the famous Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius.
Who?
When asked by a snooty friend where her jewels were, commenting on her lack of adornment, Cornelia replied that her jewels were right here, the two sons she'd raised alone after her husband's death. Cornelia was held up as an ideal Roman matron for several reasons, but primarily because she put her family first. Not only did she raise two fine, well-educated sons, but she refused to remarry. She remained loyal to her husband's house for the rest of her days. She thus lived up to the Roman ideal of the univera, a woman who had only one partner her whole life. What do we make of these extraordinary stories? Despite the horrors in most of them, they all preach that women have a vital role to play in the functioning of Roman society. Women are ambassadors and arbitrators. They bring peace between Rome and its neighbors.
If I think if I was in a
transmit
fight and I
Roman
had to
culture
arbitrate
to
it,
the
I
next
would say,
generation.
kill him, kill
Their
him, kill him, kill him.
example matters and can shape the behavior of others.
Let's kill him.
The first story, often known
But you know
as
what?
the rape of the
Before
Sabine
we
women,
kill him, ooh,
sounds ridiculous.
maybe it's a good time to pause. There's only 6 minutes left in that episode. I'm sure there'd be a lot more doom and gloom in there too. But that was actually the History of Byzantium podcast. Again, you can find it online for free. But here's also the Patreon where I was listening to that particular one. Don't know if we'll keep doing this next week with the paid versions. I feel kind of bad playing the paid versions over a stream, so maybe we won't do that. But maybe we'll listen to some of the free ones online next tomorrow during our next stream. But I think I'm gonna wrap these up offline and eat some dinner and then do some more work after that probably. Everybody who came out, thank you very much. Be good. Have a nice dinner. Have a nice sleep. And presumably same time-ish tomorrow, actually starting on the correct time, which is going to be 2 to 5. Kind of overlap a little bit with Gianni's stream, but that's okay. I never know how to wrap these up. Everybody be good. Smell you later.